Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the soot-stained, flour-dusted underworld of Victorian England to explore why it absolutely sucked to be a baker back then. And when I say sucked, I mean full body, soul draining, wake up before dawn, and regret your life. Choices kind of sucked. This isn't the cosy Great British Bake Off fantasy where people cry over underproved dough. No, this is more like if Dante's Inferno had a sourdough starter and mandatory apprenticeships. And yes, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to bribe you with sourdough tips or Victorian slang, but I am going to walk you through a day so miserable you'll be glad you were born at least a century too late. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm guessing you're horizontal, blanket wrapped, and mildly regretting scrolling this far. But hey, you're here now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's around 11:45 PM, and while your neighbours in their soot-darkened tenement flats are climbing into straw mattresses, you're dragging yourself out of yours. You shuffle toward the bakery cellar, the wooden stairs creaking beneath your weight and every step whispering a reminder. There's no turning back. The moment you open the heavy door, you're hit by the stale scent of yesterday's crusts and a thick wall of humid air that feels like someone's been boiling old bread in a soup pot. You're not a morning person. Good news, you'll never see a real morning again. For you, life begins at midnight, under gaslight, and the weak flicker of an oil lamp nailed to a wooden beam overhead. Your world smells like flour, sweat, and burnt crust. There's a low hum, the distant clatter of carts returning from night deliveries, the occasional bark of a dog echoing down the alley. But mostly it's quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your joints crack and your thoughts spiral. You descend deeper into the bakery. You live above it, because why waste rent when you can just collapse next to the sacks of barley and flour? This place is your whole world. A low-ceilinged cavern with soot-blackened bricks, iron hooks on the walls, and deep basins crusted with dried dough like the hardened icing on a very sad cake. Before you touch a scrap of flour, you have to ignite the ovens. These aren't your countertop convection types. No, these ovens are brick beasts, remnants of Georgian engineering, now choked with coal soot and the ghost of yesterday's rolls. You strike a match and ignite the coal beneath the iron belly of the bake oven. It roars to life slowly, complaining with heat and smoke. Already your back is damp. The fire makes the air thick. You haven't even started kneading, and you're sweating like you ran a foot race with a chimney sweep. And this is just the welcome mat. As you prepare the dough, you measure out your flour by the scoop. Each sack is heavy, and the flour itself clings to the air like fog. You breathe it in. It dusts your clothes, your eyelashes, your throat. You've coughed up flour before. You'll do it again before dawn. There's no proper ventilation, no masks. Just you, the dust, and your lungs slowly learning how to whistle like an old accordion. You mix everything by hand, of course. There's a giant wooden trough where the ingredients go. Flour, water, salt, and yeast that's either from a previous batch or caught wild, depending on how broke your boss is this week. The yeast has been sitting in a crock covered with a damp cloth smelling like old beer and vinegar. It's lively tonight. It hisses and bubbles as you stir it in. And that's when the muscle work begins. You knead for a long time. A long time. Your hands are chapped and calloused from years of this. You lean into the dough, pushing with your whole body weight. You fold, press, repeat. There's no music, no chit-chat. Just the wet, rhythmic thump of dough slamming into the trough. And when your arms start to shake, you switch to feet. Yes, feet. Some bakers stand inside the trough to knead with their legs like some Victorian grape-stomping nightmare. Hopefully you're still just using your hands. Eventually the dough reaches the right texture. Stretchy, smooth, slightly sticky. You roll it into balls, set them in cloth-lined baskets, and leave them near the oven to rise. This is the only quiet moment you'll get. Maybe 20 minutes to sit on a flour sack and pretend your back isn't trying to detach from your spine. But don't relax too much, because here's the thing. Victorian-era bread doesn't rise on your schedule. The yeast you're using is fickle. Too warm and it bubbles over. Too cold and it just sits there, sulking. There's a whole dark art to this. Sometimes you get perfect bloom. Other times your loaves slump like sad pancakes. And if that happens, good luck explaining to your customers, or worse, your master, why everything looks like a soggy hat. Here's a little bonus fact. Some bakers in this era, desperate for consistency, experimented with adding alum or chalk to whiten and strengthen their bread. It wasn't strictly legal, but legal is flexible when you're paid in crumbs and shame. Not that you're there yet, just keep that in the back of your ash-coated mind. You glance at the clock, 1:52 a.m, still hours to go. But the bakery is beginning to feel alive now. You hear someone upstairs, the assistant baker maybe, just waking up to begin deliveries. Soon you'll be shaping loaves, scoring crusts, and praying the oven heat stays steady. But for now, you wait, watching dough breathe and rise under its linen shroud. You wonder what it would be like to sleep through the night. There's something unholy about time in a bakery. It doesn't behave like normal time. It stretches, loops, skips forward, and then drags you backward again like you've stepped into a doughy time warp. It's now creeping past 2 a.m, and if you're keeping track, which you definitely are not because time has lost all meaning, you've already been awake for more than 2 hours. This is normal. This is your morning. Except it's still pitch black outside and most of the city is sleeping like civilized people. You, however, are lurching around in a haze of sweat, flour and mild existential panic. Your shift technically started the night before, but when it ends is, well, no one's entirely sure. The bread decides. Or more specifically, the crust, the oven, the weather, the quality of the yeast, and the temper of your boss all team up like some Victorian anti-Avengers to determine when you're allowed to collapse back into your lice-prone straw mattress. As the dough continues to rise, you prepare the next batch. This cycle doesn't stop, ever. It's a constant loop. Mix, knead, shape, bake, deliver, start again. You're not just baking loaves, you're keeping time with your body. Each batch maps onto your limbs like a painful gluten-coated clock. Kneading is 1 o'clock, shaping is 3, loading the oven is 5. Deliveries? That's sunrise. Then repeat. Every day. Forever. You've long since forgotten what it feels like to sleep through the night. Your circadian rhythm has been replaced by what can only be described as a sourdough schedule. Irregular, finicky, and prone to collapse. On your rare days off, usually when the oven's broken or your employer's been arrested for adulterating bread with bone dust, you don't even know what to do with yourself. You just lie in bed like a stunned potato, blinking at the ceiling and wondering how your hands still smell like yeast. It's not just the hours, it's the sheer cruelty of them. You're up before the milkman, before the street sweepers, before the sun even thinks about yawning. Your day starts in darkness and ends. Also in darkness, but with a vague sense of nausea and muscle tremors. That can't be healthy, right? Well, Victorian doctors actually had a few opinions on this. See, back then, physicians and reformers were very interested in the moral dangers of night work. Working overnight was thought to make you lazy, unhealthy, and susceptible to all manner of vice, from swearing too much to possibly becoming a revolutionary. The logic was, if you're not sleeping at the right time, you're probably doing crimes. So, congratulations. In addition to your aching spine and scorched forearms, you also have a reputation for being morally suspicious just because you work graveyard shifts. And let's talk about that sleep. When you do finally get to rest, it's never long enough. You might catch a nap after deliveries, maybe from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. if you're lucky. 3 hours in a tiny room above the bakery with paper-thin walls, noisy carts outside and flour literally embedded in your bed linens. Sometimes you pass out still in your apron, your hands curled as if they're still shaping dough in your sleep. You dream about bread. Not metaphorically, you actually dream about shaping rolls and fumbling with oven paddles. Then you wake up, still tired, and do it all over again. Sleep deprivation becomes a second skin. You forget words, you forget people's names. You once tried to butter your shoe instead of a slice of toast. This is your new normal. Your eyes are permanently bloodshot. Your skin's pale and patchy from a mix of heat rash, lack of sunlight and coal soot. You barely recognise yourself in the reflection of the soot-darkened mirror above the wash basin. What's worse? No one respects the schedule you're breaking your body for. Customers wander in at dawn and toss coins on the counter like they're doing you a favour. They smell the fresh bread and smile. Oh, how lovely. Fresh out of the oven. Not knowing you've already been up for 6 hours and have dough under your fingernails and probably in your ear canal. Here's a weird little fact you didn't ask for. During parts of the Victorian era, the government actually debated legislation to limit bakers' hours. It was a whole thing, the Bakehouse Acts. People were starting to notice that bakers were quite literally dying from exhaustion. Reformers argued for an 8-hour day, but surprise, employers pushed back hard. Bread waits for no one, they said, and also profits. You of course got no say, you just nodded and kept working because you had rent to pay and zero energy to unionise. Let's not forget that Victorian England wasn't exactly a bastion of workplace safety. No HR department, no mental health days, no ergonomic anything. You didn't even have the dignity of a clocking system, just your body, your muscle memory, and the knowledge that if you slept too long, the dough would overproof and your boss would slap a hot peel against the wall in rage. Fun times. There's a tiny, unspoken camaraderie among night bakers. If you cross paths on deliveries or errands, there's a quiet nod, a mutual acknowledgement that you're both exhausted, floured to the eyebrows, and slightly hallucinating. Sometimes you swear you see people that aren't there. A shadowy figure in the alley, a whisper in the bakehouse when you're alone. Sleep loss plays tricks. Either that, or this place is haunted by the ghosts of overcooked loaves. A debate still swirls among scholars about just how damaging this lifestyle was long term. Some records suggest bakers lived into their 60s, but others show high rates of respiratory illness, arthritis, and even early dementia. Was it the sleep, the flour dust, the heat, or all of it, layered together like a grim millefeuille of misery? Historians haven't quite pinned it down, but you've got a sneaking suspicion it was everything. It's now edging toward 3:30 a.m. The first batch is about to go into the oven. You reach for the long wooden peel, flour still clinging to your arms, and start loading the loaves into the glowing maw of the oven. Each loaf lands with a soft thump, the crust beginning to blister within seconds. The heat is a wave that slaps you in the face and curls your eyebrows back just a little more than yesterday. You think, this is my life. A never-ending loop of tired limbs, misshapen bread, and a time schedule that exists entirely in the dark. And yet, for now, it's quiet. The oven crackles, the dough rises, and the world outside is still asleep, unaware of the fire you're living through to make their breakfast possible. By now, the heat from the oven has soaked into your skin like you're being slow roasted alongside the bread. It's not just warmth, it's a dense, inescapable heat that clings to you, seeps through your apron, and settles into your bones like wet cement. Your hands are dry and cracked from flour dust, your eyes sting from coal smoke, and you're pretty sure one of your eyebrows just melted off. And you haven't even finished the second batch yet. The kneading begins again, because in the world of a Victorian baker, if you're not working, you're falling behind. There's no fancy equipment, no dough hook attachments or stainless steel mixers humming away in a pristine kitchen. Just your arms, aching, overused, and covered in a light crust of dried dough, and a trough that's as old as your grandfather and probably haunted by the ghosts of underpaid apprentices. It's almost laughable how physical this job is. Kneading dough sounds simple, almost poetic when you say it out loud. But after hours of it, your shoulders burn, your lower back feels like it's made of rusted chains, and your fingers lock into permanent claws. Victorian bakers didn't have gym memberships, because they were the gym. Your entire job is a repetitive, sweaty ballet of lifting, pounding, twisting, and carrying, all performed in ankle-deep flour with a side of second-degree burns. This is where the sweat comes in, a lot of it. More than you thought the human body could produce without collapsing. It drips from your forehead into the dough, no matter how often you wipe it. There's no air circulation, no refrigeration, no nice little cotton headband. Just your damp brow and a prayer that the customers don't notice their morning rolls have been seasoned with a dash of your DNA. And before you even try to cringe about that, just know, it's not even the worst ingredient used in bread at the time. Some bakers, not you of course, were caught bulking out flour with things like chalk dust, clay, or even alum, a compound that made bread look whiter and more pure, but conveniently also gave people stomach cramps and the occasional bout of internal bleeding. Lovely stuff. Entire scandals erupted in the 1850s when word got out that half the city might be unknowingly munching on masonry mix with their toast. But back to your sweat-soaked misery. There's something almost meditative about the kneading despite the pain. You get into a rhythm, push, fold, rotate. Your muscles complain, but your mind starts to drift. You think about how strange it is that bread, this soft, comforting staple of daily life, comes from such brutal labour. There's no romantic charm here, just aching hands and a bakehouse that smells like an old fireplace married a brewery and now they both regret it. And then comes the shaping. You divide the dough into equal parts by sight, because scales are expensive and time is tighter than your waistband after a heavy bread tasting. The loaves must be identical, or close enough that no one complains. Victorian customers were weirdly picky about bread shape. Round, oval, cob, split top. Every neighbourhood had opinions, and heaven help you if you bake the wrong shape on the wrong day. Once shaped, the loaves go into their proofing baskets, again covered with cloths, again resting near the oven. By now the bakehouse smells oddly comforting. There's a richness to the yeasty air, a warm sweetness that hints at the bread to come. And maybe it's the sleep deprivation, or the way your body's finally too numb to care, but for just a moment you feel okay. You glance at the wall where a tiny window sits high above your head. The faintest grey light is beginning to creep in. Morning, or what passes for morning in London, where fog and coal smoke often blot out the sky. The city is waking up, but you're deep in the middle of a shift that still has hours to go. The deliveries are coming, and soon, customers. Now take a moment to consider this. There were some Victorians who believed bakers were suspicious creatures, not just because of their long hours, but because of the secretive nature of their work. While everyone else slept, you toiled in cellars, mixing things, tending fires, and dealing in a substance as symbolic and sacred as bread. Rumours swirled about bakers who communed with the devil, or who hoarded ancient recipes with magical properties. One pamphlet even accused bakers of baking messages into their loaves to communicate with radical political groups, as if you had time to hide coded rebellion in a batch of rye. The truth is far less exciting. You're just exhausted, and your focus is narrowing. The next task is loading another round of loaves into the oven, timing them carefully, avoiding burnt crusts or raw centres, rotating them like an obsessive stagehand in a one-man show called Please Don't Ruin This Batch, I Need to Eat Today. Ovens in this era were notoriously unreliable. No thermometers, no timers, no temperature dials. You judged the heat by feel, how fast the back of your hand sizzled when held near the mouth, or how quickly a scrap of dough blackened on the hearth. Sometimes you tossed in a handful of flour and watched how it landed. If it burst into flames, it was too hot. If it sat there and stared at you, it was too cold. Baking, in other words, was equal parts experience and guesswork with a dash of panic. Right about now, you've probably got burns in places you shouldn't, flour in every fold of your clothing, and a headache that could level a cow. But you keep going, because stopping isn't an option. You rotate loaves, shift trays, peek into the inferno with eyes squinted against the heat, and pray to whatever soot-covered deity looks after people like you. One historical debate that still crops up now and then is just how much autonomy bakers had over their own working conditions. Some argue that independent bakers, those who owned their own shops, had the freedom to choose their hours and recipes. Others point out that the vast majority worked for bakery owners who demanded long shifts, paid little, and punished mistakes with rage, docked wages, or just throwing a rolling pin at your head. The truth probably depends on where you were and how bad the last bread riot was. As the last of the second batch starts to brown in the oven, you feel a tiny flicker of relief. You're halfway through the morning. The loaves are rising just enough, the crusts are crisping, and nothing has exploded yet. You're still exhausted, still sore, and still convinced this job is slowly dissolving your sanity. But for now, you've survived another round. You wipe your brow with a cloth that's already more flour than fabric and start prepping the next round. Because in this world, there's always another round. There's a certain point in the early hours when time doesn't just feel slow, it feels suspended, like the world outside has stopped spinning. You're not sure whether it's 4:45 or 5:15 a.m, but the bread tells you it's time to move. The crusts on the first batch have started to crack just slightly, golden brown and whispering that delicate popping sound, like a chorus of tiny sighs. The oven heat is roaring now, dry and greedy, and you have exactly 12 seconds to get those loaves out before they turn into something more suitable for masonry. You slide the wooden peel into the oven with practiced precision, your arms numb but automatic. One by one, the loaves come out, steam wafting, crusts crisp, the scent rich and earthy. For a fleeting moment, you could almost cry. Not from joy, more like the same weird satisfaction people get when they finish scrubbing a toilet and can finally close the lid. It's not glamorous, but it's done. A win, however small. You place the loaves on the cooling racks. rough wooden slats you built yourself with warped planks and a few angry nails. The bread sits there, steaming like a freshly bathed baby, except less adorable and more likely to singe your fingerprints off. You arrange them in tidy rows, brushing stray flour from the tops, trying to pretend this isn't your 1000th time doing exactly this. There's an odd beauty to fresh bread. You know it better than most, how it goes from sticky mess to warm perfection with just time, heat, and enough patience to break your soul. The surface is taut, gently blistered. The bottoms tap hollow if you knock them just right. You can almost forget how miserable you are when you're surrounded by these quiet rows of success. Almost. Because right as you start breathing a little easier, your least favourite part of the morning begins: deliveries. Now, if you think your job is confined to the bakehouse, think again. You're also the delivery crew. That means loading up a massive wicker basket with warm loaves, strapping it to your back, and trudging out into the early morning streets like some kind of Victorian bread mule. It's still barely light out. The gas lamps are flickering. The air smells like coal smoke and last night's horse manure. You sling the basket onto your back and instantly regret it. It's heavier than you remember. Maybe it's the fatigue, or maybe it's just that your spine has finally decided to give up. You groan as you push the bakery door open with your hip, stepping out into the street with the grace of a limping golem. The streets are mostly empty at this hour. A few milkmen clatter by in carts, their horses looking just as exhausted as you feel. Street sweepers are already at work, trying in vain to clean up a city that refuses to be cleaned. A dog barks from behind a fence. Somewhere in the distance, someone is already yelling about coal prices, and here you are, dodging puddles and dragging your aching feet down cobblestone roads, one loaf away from a full mental collapse. You visit the same customers every morning. Some are respectable households, maids answering the door, yawning, tossing you a coin, or, if you're lucky, offering a sip of tea. Others are shops, little corner stores that rely on your bread to fill their shelves before customers arrive. A few are fancy townhouses with brass knockers and frosty-eyed butlers who act like you've personally offended them by existing before 6 a.m. And of course, there are the alley customers, the poor families who buy half-loaves, day-olds, or scraps. Sometimes they don't have enough coin, and you're forced to choose between turning them away or covering the difference out of your already miserable wages. You tell yourself not to care, but when a child stares up at you with soot on their face and fingers so thin they could snap in the breeze, you usually cave. You'll pay for it later, but for now, you slip them the bread and walk away fast. Not that theft is uncommon either. Sometimes you catch a shadow darting behind you, and when you turn, half a loaf is gone. The urchins are fast, small, and more desperate than you are. One tried to barter with a dead mouse once. You said no. Barely. There's a bizarre social hierarchy baked into bread delivery. The rich want soft white loaves. The poor get brown, rough ones, usually made with more bran, less wheat, and sometimes a dash of sawdust if your master's feeling frugal. You can't help but notice the difference. You deliver soft loaves wrapped in cloth to homes with warm fires, and you deliver the crusty ends and underbaked batches to families who huddle under newspaper blankets. It sticks with you. Even among bakers, class shows its teeth. You're not considered a gentleman by any stretch. You're a tradesman. Skilled, yes, but that doesn't earn you respect. It earns you long hours, sooty lungs, and the occasional half-hearted thank you. You're in that awkward social middle. Not quite poor enough to be pitied, not rich enough to be noticed, just tired. There's one particular customer who always sticks out. A man in a tall hat who buys a single roll every morning and stares at you like you're an exhibit at a zoo. He never speaks, just flips a coin and walks away. You don't know his name, but if you ever lose your mind and go full rogue, he'll probably be the first to taste revenge via undercooked rye. By the time you've delivered your final loaf, your legs are throbbing. Your back feels like someone's taken a crowbar to your kidneys. You trudge back to the bakehouse, basket empty, stomach growling. It's nearing 7 a.m. now and the city is properly awake. Smoke rises from chimneys, carts rattle past, and people begin their days like it's all perfectly normal. You walk among them, invisible. You've been working for 7 hours and your day's only halfway done. Here's a curious fact you'd never expect. Some 19th century reformers argued that bakers should be allowed to sleep in shifts, rotating staff so no one had to endure the full night. But most shops couldn't afford that. Staff cost money, and owners, especially in London, were more interested in profit than their workers' spinal health. So the system persisted. One man, one bakehouse, one broken sleep schedule. Back inside the shop, the second batch is almost ready to load. You don't even get to sit down. You grab the peel, flex your hands, and start again. Because bread doesn't care that your boots are wet and your sole is cracked. Bread demands, and you answer. You're not sure when the oven became your mortal enemy, but at some point, maybe around the 200th burn, you stopped respecting it as a tool and started viewing it as an unpredictable beast that lives to humiliate you. It huffs and roars, swallowing loaves whole, belching soot, sometimes refusing to cook the inside of a loaf while crisping the outside into a chunk of carbonized shame. It's not just hot, it's spitefully hot. The kind of heat that peels skin if you glance at it wrong. And yet, here you are again, standing in front of it with your peel in hand, sweat collecting in your boots, your shirt clinging to your ribs. You pull the fresh batch from the proving shelves, check the rise. Decent enough, not perfect, but your standards started slipping around 4 a.m. and start sliding them in. The oven mouth glows orange-red, the coals snapping and cracking like they're laughing at you. You mutter something half prayer, half threat and shove in the loaves one by one. The burn risk is constant. You've got the scars to prove it. Your forearms look like someone tried to brand you with every shape of bread tin available. Some are red and fresh, others are pale, raised reminders that you've been doing this a long time. Burn ointment? Please. You're lucky if there's a clean rag in the shop. You usually just curse, spit on it, and keep working. Here's the catch. Ovens in Victorian England were not exactly well designed. Most were brick, wood-fired or coal-fired, and completely unregulated in terms of temperature. Some were so old and patched together with scraps that even the rats refused to nest near them. You'd test heat by sticking your hand inside and judging how quickly you regretted it. Was it an exact science? Not even close. But it was the best anyone could do. There's a trick, something passed down from a journeyman baker you once worked under, where you toss a piece of paper inside and watch how fast it browns. Too fast, cool it down. Too slow, stoke the coals. But even then, results vary wildly depending on humidity, air drafts, or whether or not the oven just hates you that day. It's like trying to bake inside a volcano and hoping the lava has consistent convection. And then there's the soot. Oh, the soot. It settles on everything. The shelves, your clothes, your lungs. It creeps into cracks in the bricks, sticks to the walls, makes your white apron look like you used it to polish chimney flues. When you cough, it's not a normal cough. It's a dry, scratchy rattle like a coal train trying to break. You taste the soot, feel it lining your throat. Sometimes your spit is black in the morning. Sometimes it stays that way all day. This is where baker's lung comes in. A condition nobody really cared about until bakers started keeling over at 45 with chest pain and shortness of breath. Breathing in flour dust and coal soot for 20 years will do that to you. It wasn't even a recognised medical issue for most of the Victorian period, just another cost of doing business, like heat stroke or sleep deprivation. The unofficial solution was don't breathe too much, which you'll agree is deeply unhelpful advice. And yet, no one talks about this. Customers walk into your shop at 8 a.m, pick up their bread, comment on how lovely it smells, and leave with zero awareness that you've been slow roasting in a soot box since midnight. They don't know that your chest feels like it's full of gravel, or that your burns sting every time you stretch. They just want their daily loaf, soft, white, with a pretty crust. You get maybe 5 minutes to sit on the flour sack before the next round is ready. Your legs tremble when you lower yourself. Your boots are soaked through with sweat. You reach into your pocket and pull out a crust from the first batch, not because it's delicious, but because you forgot to eat. Again. It's dry and a little singed on one edge, but it fills the gap in your stomach enough to keep you upright. You eat quietly, staring at the ceiling beams above your head, wondering for the 100th time how in the name of all things holy you ended up here. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some Victorian bakers, trying to one-up their competition, built windows into their ovens so customers could peek in and watch the magic happen. Problem was, ovens weren't built for that, and adding windows to a coal-fired hellbox was more of a death wish than a design innovation. One shop in East London had their viewing window explode, flinging shards of glass and burning bread halfway across the room. The baker lost his eyebrows. The customers gained trauma. Needless to say, the trend didn't last. You'd think by now your body would adapt to the heat, the burns, the brutal hours. It doesn't. It just endures. You live in a state of semi-permanent discomfort. Your knees ache. Your back knots itself up by noon and won't uncoil until the next day, maybe. If you're lucky, your fingertips don't split open from dryness. If you're really lucky, you don't trip over the uneven floorboards again and slam face first into a sack of rye. Meanwhile, the oven keeps doing its thing. It roars and crackles and occasionally throws a tiny fit, puffing soot into your face or flaring up like it's angry you dared to open the door too early. You swear at it, pat the flames back into submission, and go on with your day. Because what choice do you have? You think about the fire all the time, not in a romantic way. More like, what if one day it just spreads? What if the chimney finally gives out, or a rogue coal jumps from the firebox and lands in the flour sacks? Bakeries were notorious fire hazards. London alone had dozens of bakehouse fires in the 1800s, some sparked by overzealous ovens, others by poorly vented chimneys. It's a constant lurking fear. One bad night and poof, your entire livelihood goes up in flames. Scholars still debate whether bakehouse fires were more often caused by faulty construction or just poor regulation. The answer probably is both. Safety standards were minimal. Most ovens were patched together with whatever bricks the owner could scavenge. And chimney sweeps didn't exactly prioritise tiny bakehouse flues when they had richer clients who actually tipped. You push the thought aside and go back to work. The bread's almost ready. Again, another batch, another round of burns, another hour of aching muscles and skin that feels like it's being slow cooked. You reach for the peel, rub the sweat from your brow with the back of your arm, and step back into the heat. Because this is what it means to be a baker here. In this furnace of labour, in this city of smoke, you feed the fire so others can eat, and the fire in return feeds on you. Your arms ache so badly they feel like they're made of lead pipes wrapped in damp cloth. But you keep moving, because stopping isn't really an option when you've got 4 trays of dough ready to go and a half-feral oven snarling at your back. By now, the heat in the bakehouse has risen to the point where even the walls are sweating. Every surface feels tacky. The window panes are fogged with steam. The air is heavy with yeast and coal dust, and you swear it's thicker than water. And then it happens, again. One loaf, just one, comes out wrong. Not burnt, not raw, just strange. Slightly collapsed on one side like it gave up halfway through baking. You pick it up, turn it over, and see a soft, pale centre that didn't cook fully. It should have been golden and proud like the others. Instead, it's slouching, sad, a misshapen blob of disappointment. You stare at it in disbelief. You know you proofed it the right amount. You know the dough was kneaded well. So what happened? Was the oven too hot in that corner? Was the dough too wet? Did the wind shift? Is there such a thing as haunted flour? And just like that, the panic sets in. Because now you have to wonder, how many other loaves in this batch are ruined? How many customers will come back later today, angry and yelling, waving soft-bottomed bread like it's a declaration of war? You squeeze your temples and mutter every curse word known to Victorian English. There's no time to investigate. The next batch is rising, the oven needs feeding, and someone is already knocking at the front door. Probably early. Probably annoying. Probably asking if you have something fresh while you're elbow deep in the wreckage of an unexplained baking disaster. You hand off the ruined loaf to the apprentice, who shrugs and immediately starts eating it. No shame, just hunger. He's about 12, covered in more soot than skin, and has developed a gift for ignoring chaos. Honestly, you respect it. But the bad bread lingers in your mind. You can't shake the feeling that something's gone wrong with the yeast. Again. Yeast, for all its magical powers, is a fickle beast. You rely on it completely, and yet you understand it barely. You save a bit of each batch in a crock to seed the next one, but some days it bubbles with promise, and other days it sulks like a cat in a bucket. Back then, nobody truly understood yeast. Pasteur hadn't finished his research on fermentation yet. Most bakers worked off instinct, experience, and superstition. One baker down the street swore by singing to his yeast to keep it active, claimed it responded best to ballads. Another threw in a pinch of sugar and prayed to Saint Honoré, the patron saint of bakers, every single morning. Your method? Swearing mostly, loudly and often. There's actually some historical debate about when bakers began to consistently use cultivated yeast instead of wild or reused strains. Some scholars argue that by the 1850s, brewers' yeast was commonly sold to bakers. Others insist that most smaller bakehouses still relied on capturing yeast from the air or reusing sourdough starter. Either way, consistency was a myth. Every day was a gamble. You start prepping the next mix, glancing suspiciously at the yeast crock like it might lunge at you. You stir it gently, watching it bubble. It seems fine. Then again, so did the last batch. You take a risk and add a little warm water, hoping to coax it into cooperation. If it acts up again, you'll just have to blame the air, or the water, or Mercury in retrograde. Flour, water, salt, yeast. That's all it takes to make bread, and yet it's a puzzle every single time. And Victorian flour? Another nightmare. You had no idea if what you got from the mill was pure wheat or a bag of mystery powder with a sprinkle of ground-up animal bones. Adulteration was rampant. Some mills stretched flour with alum to make it look white and premium. Others used chalk, clay, or even sawdust. Nothing says nutritious breakfast like a pinch of Victorian drywall. There were entire exposés written about this. Pamphlets warning housewives about what might be hiding in their bread. The bread scandal of the 1850s made national headlines, with scientists and reformers uncovering horrifying additives. And while it mostly pointed fingers at millers and factory bakers, you, the humble neighbourhood baker, caught the side eye too. Customers started sniffing loaves, poking crusts, asking awkward questions. You couldn't blame them, really. Bread was a daily staple, often the only thing poor families ate in a day. If it made them sick, or worse, there was nowhere to go but down. One wrong batch could ruin a business, a reputation, even a life. So here you are, doing your best with ingredients you barely trust, yeast you can't control, and equipment that actively seems to resent your presence. And somehow, the public still thinks you're the villain. There's an awkward tension in your role. You're essential, people need bread, but you're also suspect. Too many bakers cutting corners, too many rumours about poisoned loaves and cheating scales. You get dirty looks if you raise your prices even a penny. One bad review from the vicar's wife and your shop might as well catch fire. That's the strangest part, really. You work yourself into the grave trying to feed people, and in return, they treat you like you're running some kind of flour cartel. You glance over at the bench where the next round of dough is proofing. The air is slightly cooler now, only because your body's too drained to notice the heat. The light outside has shifted to a hazy gold. The street sounds louder, busier. Someone bangs on the front door again, and the apprentice yells, "Customer!" You sigh, wipe your hands on your apron, and trudge up the stairs to deal with whoever needs their bread right now. Probably a housemaid with an attitude, or a gentleman who thinks witty banter means insulting your trade. One of these days you swear you'll toss a raw dough ball at someone's hat just to see what happens. Maybe they'll write about it in the papers. Local baker loses it, bread used as weapon. Honestly, at this point it would be a well-earned headline. You know that feeling when you've done everything right, followed the recipe, tended the oven like it was your firstborn, watched the dough rise like a proud parent, and still, your loaf comes out looking like a brick someone left in a puddle. Welcome to the Victorian baker's life. No matter how careful you are, no matter how many hours you've sweated over every knead and proof, some days your bread simply betrays you. Today's loaves, heavy, dense, a bit squat. Still edible, sure, but if someone tossed one at your head, you'd feel it. Probably see stars. Maybe need a dentist. You line them up on the front counter anyway. The smell helps. Warm, toasty, comforting. Like the memory of a better life. But there's no disguising their shape. They don't have that pretty domed finish that makes customers sigh with joy. They look tired. Kinda like you. And here's the cruel irony. It's not even your fault. The flour was off this morning. Too coarse, almost gritty. Probably sat in a damp warehouse for too long, picked up moisture, or maybe even weevils before it reached your doorstep. You tried to sift it, picked out the worst bits, but you could tell the moment your fingers touched it. This was going to be a tough batch. You do your best to act like everything's fine when the first few customers file in. A maid buys 2 loaves for her employer, barely glancing at you. A newsboy grabs a bun and runs off with a mumbled, "Cheers!" Then a man in a cravat shows up, some minor clerk full of his own self-importance, and he picks up a loaf with 2 fingers like it's something foul. "Bit heavy today, isn't it?" he mutters with a smirk. You grit your teeth. "Must be the damp," you say, voice flat. He nods, clearly pleased with himself, pays with exact change, and walks out like he's just won a duel. You resist the urge to throw a roll at his neck. That's the thing about baking here. No one sees the labour, they just see the end result. If the crust is too thick or the loaf too squat, it's your fault. Doesn't matter if the oven cracked overnight or if the flour was 2 days from compost. Doesn't matter if your kneading arm is numb or your spine clicks when you bend. You're just the person behind the counter. If the bread's off, you're off. It gets into your head eventually, makes you doubt your own hands, your own instincts. You start overthinking everything. Was the water too hot? Was the air too dry? Did the yeast get offended somehow? Victorian bakers weren't just craftsmen. They were part-time detectives, part-time gamblers, and full-time scapegoats. In quieter moments, when the morning rush dies down and the shop is briefly empty, you find yourself staring at a loaf, slicing it open, inspecting the crumb like it holds the secrets of the universe. You poke at the bubbles in the bread, sniff the crust, take a bite. It's not bad, it's actually fine. Maybe not your best, but still better than most of the mass-produced trash coming out of the newer factory bakeries. Ah, yes, them. Industrial bakeries are beginning to creep into the picture now, pushing out the small independent shops one street at a time. Big ovens, conveyor belts, bulk ingredients. They churn out thousands of loaves a day. Cheap, fast, consistent. Customers love them. Never mind that the bread tastes like sponge soaked in sadness. It's white, it's soft, and it doesn't collapse if you look at it sideways. There's debate in the trade about whether these factory bakeries are the future or just a passing fad. The romantics say that people will always want fresh handmade bread from the neighbourhood bakehouse. The realists say, get used to the idea of becoming obsolete. You're somewhere in the middle, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, and secretly fantasizing about setting one of those steel ovens on fire. But for now, the competition adds pressure. Your customers expect more even as your resources shrink. You can't raise prices without losing business. You can't afford better flour without raising prices. It's a cycle, and you're stuck spinning like dough in a proving bowl. You run your hands over your face and realize again that they feel like sandpaper. You've long stopped caring about blisters. Your skin peels from heat and friction so often you could leave a trail of yourself across the floorboards. Your fingertips have almost no sensation anymore, just calluses, cuts, and the occasional numb patch that makes shaping buns extra fun. Here's something weird. Some Victorian bakers swore by testing dough texture with their lips instead of their hands. Said it was more sensitive, gave better feedback. You tried it once, briefly, and immediately regretted it. Your face does not belong in a mixing trough. But these little rituals, however strange, are what keep you going. You find a sort of rhythm in the madness. The way the dough stretches when it's just right. The way the crust crackles when it cools. The way the shop smells at precisely 8:32 a.m. when everything's fresh. The coal is settled, and the worst of the day is behind you, until someone ruins it. Around 9 o'clock your landlord stops by. Of course he does. He's a squat, red-faced man with a moustache that looks like it's trying to escape his face. He leans on your counter, surveys the loaves, and raises an eyebrow. Bit overbaked today, aren't they? You smile tightly. They'll keep longer. He grunts. Rent's due. End of week. You nod. You always nod, and he always reminds you, even though you haven't missed a payment in 7 months. Then he takes a loaf, doesn't pay, never pays, and leaves. That's the tax for breathing in your own shop. You stand there for a moment after he's gone, staring at the empty spot where the loaf sat. You don't say anything. You don't need to. Your spine already said it all when it crumpled slightly under the weight of your rage. One customer, one landlord, one load of bread that could double as a paperweight. It's just one of those days. So you take the next tray, head back to the bakehouse and start again. Because you don't have time to mope. You've got another batch to shape. And maybe this time, if the flour behaves and the yeast doesn't have a nervous breakdown, you'll get a perfect loaf. And if not, well, there's always the possibility of weaponizing the rejects. You can't walk down the street without someone side-eyeing your bread like it's suspiciously too white, too soft, or too perfect. Not that many of your loaves look particularly elegant today. Your last batch hit a rough patch. Read, collapsed under mysterious circumstances. But still, the paranoia is real. Because as a Victorian baker, you're constantly under suspicion of doing unspeakable things to perfectly innocent bread. Adulteration. That's the word on everybody's lips, tossed around in whispers like you're running an underground crime syndicate. People think you're padding your flour with chalk, mixing in ground bones, even shaving plaster off the walls to make the bread whiter. They think you're part of some bread conspiracy, some unholy alliance between desperate bakers, shady millers, and the devil himself. all because white bread, which everyone wants, is expensive to make. You didn't start the scandal, but you're stuck in the fallout. A few unscrupulous bakers across London, cutting corners to stretch their flour, boost profits, and feed the demand for soft white loaves, set off a nationwide panic. Newspapers fanned the flames. Pamphlets warned mothers about poisoned bread killing babies in their cradles. Political cartoons depicted bakers as mustachioed villains pouring white powder into mixing troughs like mad scientists. And suddenly, even your most loyal customers started looking at you like you were trying to assassinate their breakfast. You'd laugh if it weren't so exhausting. The truth? Sure, some bakers got desperate. Alum made bread appear fresher. Chalk added weight. Bone dust. Don't even ask. But most of you? You're just trying to survive the day without losing a finger to the oven or your sanity to the yeast. You wouldn't dare risk a scandal. You can't. Because once you're accused, that's it. People stop buying. Rumours spread. You become that bakery, the one with those loaves. You've seen it happen. A shop 2 streets over was accused of mixing in pipe clay after a woman claimed her bread tasted like stone. She might have just had a cold, but it didn't matter. Within a month, the shutters were nailed shut. Still, you do little things to keep people calm. Leave the door open so they can see the bakehouse. Offer crusts to children. Talk through your ingredients like you're teaching a class. Just flour, salt, yeast, water, nothing else. You sound like a broken record, but it works, usually. Every now and then, though, someone shows up ready to fight. Like Mrs. Penfold, the widow with the pointy umbrella who buys a half-loaf every Thursday. She's standing in the shop now, holding a slice like it's made of poison. "This one's too light," she says, voice sharp, almost suspiciously light. You glance at the loaf. It's not suspicious. It's just not weighed down with dense flour like the others, one of the few good ones today. You explain. Gently, calmly, her eyes narrow. "You sure there's no extra powder?" she asks. You resist the urge to suggest she get her taste buds examined and instead offer her a replacement. For free. She leaves muttering something about modern bakers, and you collapse against the counter like you've just dodged a musket shot. But the anxiety doesn't leave. It simmers under your skin, bubbling like yeast gone rogue. You start checking each loaf more carefully, tapping the bottoms, breaking a few open. You're not just a baker anymore. You're a quality control inspector, damage control specialist and public relations officer, rolled into one tired, soot-covered human. Here's the extra fun twist. Bread adulteration was such a hot-button issue that Parliament got involved. Multiple times. In the mid-1800s, several bread acts were introduced to regulate what could and couldn't be added to flour. Inspectors were appointed to check bakeries, though half of them had no idea what they were looking for. Some were ex-milkmen or tax collectors who'd never baked a loaf in their lives. One even mistook bran for dirt. Of course, these visits never came at convenient times. They usually showed up mid-morning, when you were neck-deep in deliveries and juggling proofing schedules with burn ointment. You'd have to stop everything, open your flour bins, recite ingredient lists, and pray they didn't decide your flour sack was too dusty. Some bakers kept 2 flour stocks, one for show, one for use, just to make the inspections go smoother. You haven't sunk that low yet, but you understand the temptation. And the worst part, even if you're totally innocent, you're still tainted by association. If the shop down the street gets shut down for selling ghost chalk bread, your customers start asking questions. They lower their voices, they inspect their loaves more carefully, they buy less. You can feel the suspicion like a draft in your bones. There's a fringe belief floating around, a truly bizarre one, that some bakers are sabotaging each other, slipping chalk into rival flour bins, whispering rumours to housemaids and butlers, even planting suspicious-looking loaves in shop windows. It sounds ridiculous, but after the 3rd time you found a broken loaf left on your doorstep with no note, you started to wonder. Bread, you realise, isn't just food. It's politics. It's economics. It's trust. And in a world where people don't have much to eat, messing with their bread is the same as threatening their lives. You take a long look at the fresh loaves on the shelf. They're decent. Not perfect, but honest. And that has to count for something. Out back, the apprentice is sweeping flour dust into the corners again, probably redistributing it more than removing it. You yell at him to toss out the old starter from 2 days ago. He pretends he hears you. You know he doesn't. You lean against the doorframe for a moment, the sun finally up, the heat in the bakehouse dying down a little. The air smells of bread and smoke and something slightly metallic, probably your own blood from the small burn on your thumb. You wonder what it would be like to just bake. No fear, no regulations, no customers whispering about chalk. Just flour, water, salt, yeast, simplicity, peace. But that's not this life, not this city, not this century. So you dust off your apron, grab the next sack of flour and get ready to make another batch. The people want bread, and they want it pure, even if it kills you. If there's one thing worse than being a baker accused of poisoning the public, it's being a baker caught in the crosshairs of the law, while the law itself is fumbling around with a half-baked understanding of bread. You're not sure who decided that the best way to regulate bakehouses was by sending in semi-retired gentlemen who think yeast is a type of fungus you can kill with a stern letter, but here we are. You've just been informed that an inspector is coming by later this week. That's the kind of news that ruins a perfectly good morning, and by perfectly good, you of course mean marginally less soul-crushing than usual. You already know what to expect. A man in a bowler hat with a clipboard, a suspicious expression, and absolutely no idea what he's looking at. He'll poke the flour bins like he's expecting rats to leap out, sniff your bread like it's hiding opium, and ask incredibly unhelpful questions like, "Why is this one brown?" You don't get to say what you're thinking, which is that maybe if he'd ever actually baked something in his life, he'd know that wholemeal flour exists and that not everything pale is pure. But you smile, you nod, you answer. Because one wrong look, one sarcastic comment, and he could have your bakehouse shut down for unsanitary conditions, which in practice usually just means didn't kiss enough bureaucratic behind. Victorian regulations are a mess. The Bakehouse Acts were supposed to make things better, and in a few ways they did. Technically, you're not supposed to work your apprentices past a certain number of hours. Technically, the bakery should be properly ventilated. Technically, food safety is a priority. But technically is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because enforcement is wildly inconsistent, and compliance often depends on who's watching, or more importantly, who isn't. The inspectors are part of this weird system where punishment is often more about appearances than actual danger. One bakery can get shut down for having a rat problem, while another continues operating despite baking next to an open sewer, because the latter is owned by someone who knows someone, and you know no one. You've heard stories. One baker fined 10 shillings for excessive soot on ceiling beams. Another dragged through court because an inspector claimed his bread smelled of soap. The soap, it turned out, was from a bar sitting near the proving cloths, but facts don't matter when reputations are involved. These men don't bake, they audit. They descend on your shop like vultures looking for a carcass, not to improve your business but to catch you out. So what do? You start cleaning. Not that the bakery's filthy to begin with, but it's not exactly sparkling. It can't be. You work with flour and soot and coal smoke and the occasional escaped mouse. The walls are stained from years of steam and fire. The oven is crusted with baked-on history. Your proving baskets are lined with cloth that no amount of scrubbing will ever make new again. You scrub anyway. The apprentice whines but helps, dragging a stiff broom across the floor, mostly just stirring the flour dust into new artistic swirls. You wash the windows, wipe down the shelves, and try not to think about the deep-set grime between the floorboards that could probably tell its own story if someone took a microscope to it. And still, you know it won't be enough. These inspectors come with a mindset. They're not looking to be reassured. They're looking to be disgusted. They want to find something, and if they don't, well, they might invent it. A lesser-known but surprisingly common tactic in the Victorian bakehouse game is the surprise moral lecture. Sometimes an inspector, or even a visiting local politician, won't just examine your bread, he'll examine you, your hygiene, your manners, the moral state of your business. Too many apprentices living on site, suspicious, a sleeping cot near the flour sacks, unprofessional, no crucifix on the wall, unchristian. Never mind that you've been up since midnight and the only thing you're trying to do is not burn a batch of bread. In their eyes, you're not just a tradesman, you're a potential threat to public health and public virtue. A man who keeps strange hours, operates a fiery furnace in a basement, and mingles with all classes of society. Clearly suspicious, almost revolutionary if you think about it too hard. You clean your hands again and glance in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. You look like a criminal in a bad novel. Sunken eyes, soot-streaked face. The kind of posture that says, I've fought 2 wars, one with dough, one with sleep. If only people judged effort by calluses. The problem is that even when you do follow every rule, there's still the unshakable feeling that you're one broken loaf away from disaster. One undercooked centre, one too dark crust, and your entire week's reputation is toast, no pun intended. And the worst part, no one even considers how much you're already doing with how little you've got. The firewood, damp, the flour, inconsistent. The water supply, questionable on a good day and downright terrifying on a bad one. Your tools are old, your back is older, and your best employee is a boy who thinks cleaning involves throwing water at things until they stop being dirty. Still, you carry on. You shape the dough, you time the bakes, you watch the flames, and every so often you allow yourself the small rebellious joy of putting out a perfect loaf. Not just edible, not just passable, perfect. It's not for the inspector, it's not even for the customer, it's for you. Because deep down, despite everything, you do take pride in your work. You care that the crust crackles just right when it cools, that the crumb is soft and warm and laced with the scent of honest effort. You care that a hungry man might take a bite and sigh with something close to relief. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens enough to keep you going. Of course, by the time the inspector actually shows up, you're so anxious you nearly burn the current batch. He walks in, looks around like he's sizing up a crime scene, and says nothing for a long time. He taps the floor with his cane, sniffs, raises an eyebrow at your apprentice, who promptly drops a proving cloth into a bowl of water. Then he grunts, jots something down, and leaves without a word. You collapse onto a flour sack like a man who's just survived battle. Your apprentice grins. "Didn't even check the flour bin," he says. You laugh, the sound hollow but honest, because that's Victorian bakery life. Unfair, uncertain, and utterly absurd. But still, somehow, you're winning. For now. Just when you think you've earned a moment to breathe, maybe sit for half a minute without something burning, boiling over or demanding your immediate attention, you hear it. A distant thud, then another, louder this time, then shouting. Not regular, annoyed customer shouting. Not your apprentice just dropped a tray shouting. This is real, dangerous shouting. You step out of the bakehouse, squinting into the hazy light seeping through the coal-smudged windows, and then you see it. A crowd forming down the street, faces twisted in anger, voices rising like storm clouds. You don't even have to ask what it is. Bread riot. This isn't the first one you've seen, not by a long shot, but it still hits you like a fist to the chest. All it takes is one price hike, one bad harvest, one whisper that someone's been hoarding loaves, and boom! The street becomes a battlefield, and you, unfortunately, are standing on the front line with nothing but a flour-dusted apron and the crusts of yesterday's batch. This crowd looks hungry. Not metaphorically hungry, actually hungry. That kind of wild-eyed, brittle desperation that turns ordinary people into a mob. There's a woman in the front shaking her fist and yelling about her children. An older man with a smashed-up hat is shouting about injustice, and someone else, hooded, quiet, just tosses a rock. It doesn't hit anything. Yet. You duck back inside and bolt the door, not because you're guilty of anything, but because once people start blaming bakers, logic goes out the window. They don't care that you've been working 17 hours straight or that you're barely breaking even. To them, you represent food, and if there isn't enough of it, you must be the one keeping it from them. This is the brutal reality. During times of scarcity, bread becomes more than food. It becomes symbol of survival, of class, of corruption. When things go bad, people don't riot at the flour mill. They don't storm the bank, they storm you. Because you're visible. Because they can see the loaves in your window, smell the baking from the street, hear the crackle of crusts cooling while their stomachs are empty. You peek through the shutter, the crowd still growing. Your apprentice is crouched under the counter, muttering something about moving to sea and becoming a fisherman. You almost laugh. Almost. And the worst part? You get it. You do. You've seen the price of flour rise and fall like a drunkard's mood. Watched as bakers got squeezed from both ends, charged more for ingredients and pressured to sell loaves at the same low price. You've seen poor mothers cry when you had to tell them there were no half loaves left, nothing stale enough to discount, and now you're the target. You think back to a few years ago when another bakery, just 2 neighbourhoods over, was ransacked. They smashed the windows, tore down the door and carried off every loaf, every bag of flour, even the broom. Left the place looking like a hurricane had passed through. The baker had done nothing wrong, just unlucky enough to be open when the hunger hit a boiling point. Some historians later called these riots food disturbances, like that somehow sounds more polite. But it's a riot. It's survival. It's desperation, unbaked and still raw. There's ongoing debate, actually, among scholars. Some argue these weren't just about hunger, but about dignity. That people could handle being poor, but not being humiliated. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was identity. If you couldn't even feed your family a crust of decent bread, what were you? You grip the counter and breathe through your nose. You're not rich, you're not hoarding. You've got exactly 5 sacks of flour left. None of it fancy, and 2 of them probably have moths in them. But no one outside wants to hear that. Thud. Another rock. This one hits the door. You jump. It doesn't break anything, but the message is clear. Open up, or else. You could open the door. You could hand out the few loaves you have left. You've done it before, during a smaller crowd. It calmed people down, brought you some goodwill. But today, the numbers are bigger, the mood worse. If you give in, it might not be seen as generosity. It might be seen as weakness, and weakness invites more violence. The apprentice peeks up from under the counter. You think they'll break the window, he whispers. You sigh. Probably. And sure enough, not 10 seconds later you hear the sharp crack of glass. The side window. You don't even flinch anymore. Just grab the thick cloth you keep near the oven mitts and start wrapping up a few loaves. You're going to have to give them something, or this place won't be standing by nightfall. You unlatch the door slowly and step outside, holding a tray of bread like an offering. The noise dips for a second as people notice you. You hold up your hands. This is what I've got, you say. That's it. If you break in, you'll find nothing but ashes and debt. A woman steps forward, grabs a loaf, nods. Then another. It's like throwing scraps to wolves and praying they stay full long enough to wander off. You stand there as they empty your tray, your heart thudding in time with their footsteps. Eventually the crowd begins to thin, not because they're satisfied, but because they know there's nothing left to take. You retreat back inside, bolt the door again, and collapse onto the floor. The bread is gone, your shelves are bare, but your bakery is still standing, for now. The apprentice finally stands up and mutters, "I hate bread." You nod. Me too. The shop smells like coal, sweat, and fear. The kind of smell that clings to you even after you've bathed, if you ever find the time to bathe. You pull yourself up, stretch your aching back, and begin the slow process of cleaning up the broken glass, stepping carefully around the shards like you're tiptoeing through a dream that's starting to turn into a nightmare. Because that's what this job is most days. A tightrope walk over fire with a loaf in each hand and a mob waiting on either side. You never know when the rope will snap, and when it does, all you've got is your apron and your stubbornness to break the fall. The shop is quiet now, in that eerie, post-chaos kind of way. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your ribs and presses down hard, like the moment after a lightning strike when everything holds its breath. You stare at the cracked window, jagged edges catching the pale morning light. There's flour on the floor, a smear of soot on the counter, and only a single loaf left on the shelf, half smashed, lopsided, and still warm. You'd call it tragic if you weren't too tired to feel anything at all, but the day isn't over, not even close. Because being a baker in Victorian England isn't just about bread, it's about endurance. It's about surviving long after you've run out of energy, patience, or cartilage in your knees. Your body is done, your mind's trailing behind like a sack tied to a runaway cart, and yet you keep moving. Why? Habit, duty, debt, take your pick. You shuffle back into the bakehouse, the heat a little less intense now but still thick enough to wring sweat from your skin with every step. You dip your hands into a basin of lukewarm water, trying to scrub off the flour crust that's practically embedded in your pores. It doesn't help much. Your fingernails are permanently stained pale grey, and your knuckles are so raw they look like you've been in a fistfight with a bag of sand. You glance at the clock. Almost midday. That means it's been over 12 hours since you started. You should be resting. But no, you've got clean-up to do, logs to split for the next fire, a delivery invoice to chase down because the miller forgot to include your barley flour, and because the universe never stops laughing. Your sourdough starter is beginning to smell suspiciously like rotten apples. So you keep going. There's a lull now. No customers, no shouting. Just the hiss of cooling loaves and the occasional creak from upstairs. The apprentice is asleep somewhere, probably curled up in the storage room beneath a sack of oats like a Victorian raccoon. You let him be. He earned it. Sort of. You take 1 minute to sit on the old bench by the back door. The wood's splintered, your apron's damp, and your back is yelling at you in a language that's mostly made of groans. You close your eyes, and of course, that's when someone knocks. Not angrily, not a riot this time, just a quiet, measured tap. You drag yourself up, open the door, and find a girl, maybe 8 or 9, holding a coin in her palm and staring up at you with eyes that could crack stone. "Do you have any bread, sir?" she asks. Your stomach sinks. You glance back at the half-loaf on the shelf. It's stale now, the crust already going hard. You hesitate. Technically, that's worth more than what she's holding. But technically, she's got holes in her sleeves, dirt on her cheeks, and shoes that wouldn't last a good rain. You nod. Slice the loaf in half, wrap it in paper, hand it to her with a look that says, "Don't say anything, just go." She doesn't smile, just nods, like she expected you to do the right thing. Then she disappears into the street, and you're left staring after her, wondering how much longer you can afford to be a decent human being. Here's the maddening truth. You're stuck in a system that doesn't let anyone win. You're not poor enough to earn pity, not rich enough to feel safe, and not dishonest enough to make real profit. You float in this middle space, exhausted, unseen, and necessary. Your work feeds the neighbourhood, but you could vanish tomorrow and be replaced by someone just as desperate, just as skilled, just as ready to burn their life away for a few shillings and a shot at dignity. The city, in all its coal-choked, fog-drenched glory, doesn't care about your blisters, or your loyalty to your trade, or the fact that your shoulders creak when you roll out of bed each day like they're made of rusted gate hinges. London doesn't reward quiet sacrifice. It rewards spectacle, and bread, for all its importance, doesn't exactly make headlines unless someone's choking on chalk or storming a bakery with a chair leg. There's a fringe theory, half rumour, half wishful thinking, that someday machines will do this work. Big ovens, automated kneading, even mixing powered by steam. Some laugh at the idea, call it fantasy. Others swear it's already happening in the industrial districts, hidden behind tall walls and factory gates. You've never seen it yourself, but if it's true, well, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Maybe it would mean the next baker doesn't have to wake up at midnight and bleed into the crust to stay afloat. Still, even if machines could do it, would they care? Would they notice the way the dough feels slightly different when the humidity changes, or how a loaf hums softly when it's cooling just right? You doubt it. But it's not like the city pays you extra for soul. You stand up again, legs groaning. There's ash in the oven you still need to sweep, coal bins to refill, and a delivery coming tomorrow. Hopefully. You make a note to chase the miller again. He has a habit of disappearing when payment is due, only to reappear 2 days late with flour that smells like someone stored it next to pickled fish. As you start wiping down the counters, you notice something new. A burn on the back of your left hand. You don't even remember getting it. Just a red, blistered patch that must have happened when you reached too close to the oven earlier. It stings, not badly, just enough to remind you that you are still, somehow, a human being. You wrap it in a rag and keep going. Because the bakehouse doesn't clean itself, the customers won't stop coming, and the city doesn't pause for your pain. You work through the soreness, through the silence, through the fading light that filters through the soot-dulled windows. And when the bell above the door rings again, because of course it does, you don't even flinch. You just sigh, wipe your hands, and greet the next person like it's the first hour of your day, not the 13th. Because that's what it means to be a baker here. You don't get to stop. You don't get to collapse. You just keep going, until the last loaf is gone. There's a kind of madness that creeps in when you've been awake for too long, worked too hard, and smelled nothing but yeast and burning coal for half a lifetime. You're in that strange, stretched-out part of the day where your brain starts detaching from your body, floating somewhere above your flour-covered boots, watching everything you do with detached curiosity. Like, look at this poor soul folding dough again, hands cracked and stained, posture shaped like a human question mark. Somebody ought to help him. You are, of course, that poor soul, and nobody is coming. The afternoon sun is filtering in weakly through the bakehouse windows, illuminating every speck of flour hanging in the air like slow-motion snow. You'd almost call it beautiful if it wasn't also making it incredibly obvious how much grime is on every surface. You could spend hours scrubbing this place and it still wouldn't pass a white glove inspection, which luckily, no one around here owns white gloves. The oven is still hot, still hungry. Even when there's no batch inside, you have to keep it going. Letting it go cold is a disaster, You'd waste precious fuel bringing it back to baking temp, and if you're unlucky, the bricks might crack from the sudden shift. It's a living thing, this oven. More temperamental than any apprentice you've ever had, and twice as dangerous when neglected. And speaking of apprentices, yours has reappeared from wherever he'd been hiding, cheeks smudged, shirt half untucked, looking like he just fought a bag of sugar and lost. He slouches in with a piece of crust between his teeth, chewing like a goat. "You're meant to be prepping the rolls," you say, not even looking up. "I was just taking inventory," he lies. "In the storeroom?" He nods slowly. "Yes." You don't even bother correcting him anymore. He's young, lazy, but not the worst you've seen. The worst one tried to dry proving cloths on top of the oven and nearly set the entire building on fire. At least this one knows to duck when you throw a rolling pin. You toss him a lump of dough to knead. He catches it, barely, and gets to work, hands clumsy but enthusiastic. You remember being like that once, back when your arms were still strong and your joints didn't crack like kindling every time you bent over the bench. Back when this work felt like a craft instead of a slow-motion collapse. That's the cruel part of it all. You wanted this once. Back when you were a boy, wide-eyed, watching the town baker slap loaves into the oven like it was magic. You imagined mornings filled with warm smells and smiling customers, proud hands shaping perfect rounds of dough, a trade passed down with love and pride. Reality, of course, had other plans. You were apprenticed at 14 to a man who believed kindness was a waste of breath, and that throwing stale bread at your head built character. You spent years scrubbing ovens, fetching water, sleeping on a sack of barley with rats for roommates. You were burned, blamed, overworked, and underfed, and somehow you stayed. Why? Because baking was a skill, a living, a lifeline. And if you were going to break your back doing something, it might as well be something people needed. Something essential. There's an odd kind of nobility in that. Quiet, invisible nobility. No one claps for the baker. You don't get statues or ceremonies or even a free drink at the pub. But you know the city would crack without you. You hold its mornings together. You are the silent beginning of every day. And still, you can't help wondering what it's all doing to your body. Your hands have become maps of scars and calluses. You can't remember the last time your nails were clean. Your spine hums with a constant ache, like the bones are whispering their grievances every time you breathe. Your knees throb when you walk, your shoulders creak when you lift, and sometimes, when you stop moving for even a second, you feel the exhaustion behind your eyes like a tidal wave waiting to drown you. It's not just the physical toll either. There's something deeply isolating about the schedule. You wake up when the city sleeps. You sleep, if at all, when it's roaring at full volume. You miss birthdays, holidays, any event that happens during normal hours. Friends drift away, family visits dry up. You become a ghost with a flowery apron, present but unseen. There's a baker 2 blocks down who stopped speaking altogether. No one's sure why. Some say his apprentice died in a fire. Others think he just snapped one morning, staring into a burnt loaf and deciding language was too much effort. You see him sometimes, pushing a cart silently, eyes hollow. You're not there yet. But you understand. Oddly enough, one of the most discussed debates among historians studying trades like yours is whether the Victorian baker's lifestyle was more isolating than other jobs of the era. Some argue that miners had it worse, dangerous, dirty and life-shortening. Others point to domestic servants who worked constantly under someone else's roof. But you've always felt that your solitude was specific. You exist among people but apart from them. You feed them, but you're rarely invited to their tables. You catch yourself staring at the oven, zoning out again. You blink, then shake your head and pull yourself back into motion. There's more dough to shape. Always more. Your hands move automatically, pinching and folding, rounding loaves with the kind of muscle memory that doesn't need a brain attached. Outside, the city hums. You hear the clip-clop of hooves, the distant clang of church bells, the shout of a vendor hawking chestnuts. Life is carrying on, and you're here, elbow deep in something sticky that used to be a future. The apprentice clears his throat. You ever think about quitting? You glance at him. Every day. He nods like that makes sense, then after a pause, so why don't you? You shrug. What else would I do? He doesn't answer, because there is no answer. You've given everything to this. Your youth, your health, your nights. You are bread now, formed by heat, hardened by time, cracked, but holding together. And somewhere in the middle of this dusty, aching, soot-coloured life, you still care. Against all logic, against all exhaustion, you care that the loaves are shaped right, that the crust browns evenly, that the inside is soft, warm, and feeds someone who needs it. You slide another tray into the oven and close the door with a soft clang. The fire flares, your back twinges, and you keep going. Because you are a baker, and this is what you do. If you thought baking was the worst part, you haven't spent enough time dragging a basket of hot bread through the slop-soaked streets of London before dawn. Because now that the loaves are cooling and the oven's settling into a post-bake simmer, it's time for the other half of your job, deliveries. And unlike the blessed solitude of the bakehouse, delivery means wrestling with a city that's half awake and fully indifferent to your suffering. You load up the basket, the big one, thick-handled and lined with cloth that no longer remembers its original colour. The weight of it pulls against your spine as soon as you hoist it over your shoulder. It's the kind of heavy that shifts as you walk, swaying, knocking your knees, testing your balance with every cobblestone. You're already tired, but deliveries don't care about that. No one ever said, "Wait, the baker needs a nap first." You set off down the alley behind the bakehouse, boots crunching over gravel and who knows what. The street's still slick from last night's drizzle, and the gutters are alive with the usual mix of runoff, rat droppings, and whatever the horses were polite enough to leave behind. Victorian London has a smell that defies polite description. A rich bouquet of coal smoke, fish guts, spilled gin, and the occasional dead thing you try very hard not to look at too closely. Your first stop is always Mrs. Farrow's corner shop. She's one of the few who actually opens before sunrise, and by now she knows your knock by heart. She answers the door in a flannel robe, hair in a crooked braid, hands already stained with ink from her ledger. She doesn't smile, not really, but she gives a grunt that passes for a greeting. You hand over 3 loaves and 1 rye, and she slips a few coins into your palm. "You're late," she says. You're not. But you nod anyway and move on. Next is the grand townhouse 4 doors down, where the staff never make eye contact and the butler insists on inspecting every loaf like he's choosing wine. You could hand him a perfect, glistening, gold-crusted masterpiece, and he'd still frown and prod it like you're trying to poison the master. "Bit light," he mutters. He always says that. You resist the urge to say something you'd regret and hand him a slightly larger loaf just to end the interaction. You pass 2 lads hauling coal, one of whom smirks and says, "Oi, baker, save me a bun," before flicking a clod of soot at your coat. You don't respond, partially because you're too tired, and partially because your hands are full and your dignity doesn't have the energy to engage today. This part of the job is physically punishing in a way that's somehow more humiliating than hauling flour or battling ovens. Because here, you're not just working, you're on display. You're that tired, sweating figure trudging down the street, marked by the flour in your hair and the crusted heat rash behind your ears. People see you as a background feature of their day. You're not a craftsman now, you're the bread guy. The worst delivery is always the tenement building on Clavichord Street. You climb 4 flights of narrow stairs, wood creaking like it might give out under your boots, just to hand over 2 crusty half loaves to a widow who pays in coins so small they barely count as currency. The flat smells like damp laundry and cabbage. She thanks you, gently, and you wonder if you're the only person she'll speak to all week. There's something both sad and strangely holy about that. You're not a preacher, not a doctor, not someone grand, but you bring the thing that keeps people alive. In a city this big, so full of strangers and soot and cold wind, bread is something people still recognise, something they hold, break, eat and share. It might be the only thing some of them can afford to give their children today. And yet, here's the kicker. If you trip on a loose stone and drop your basket, if a dog runs off with a loaf, if rain soaks through and ruins your crusts, you pay for it. No one reimburses a baker for a lost delivery. It comes out of your already pitiful earnings. Every soggy bun is money gone. Every missed doorstep is a black mark. One too many mistakes, and people go to another shop. Loyalty, as you've learned, has a shelf life shorter than a white roll left on the windowsill. You stop at a pub, the 3rd customer on your route, where the innkeeper buys a dozen rolls each morning for the breakfast crowd. He always smells like beer, even before dawn, and his teeth are a graveyard. He grins, slaps your shoulder hard enough to knock the breath out of you, and drops a heavy coin into your apron pocket. "Best in the ward," he says. He says that every day. You still wonder if he says the same to the next baker down the road. Once, on this very route, you twisted your ankle on a broken paving stone and fell. Hard. Loaves everywhere. Mud and misery and a bruised hip that didn't let you sit right for a week. And the worst part wasn't the pain or the clean-up. It was the look on the customer's face when you tried to explain. That vaguely annoyed expression that said, "Well, what am I supposed to eat then?" Because no one really thinks about how the bread gets to them. It just appears. Warm, fresh, ready. They don't picture you stumbling through alleyways with a basket that weighs more than some people's rent. They don't know your shoulders burn like fire, or that your boots are soaked from stepping into a puddle you couldn't avoid because you were too busy balancing your week's wages in baked form. Here's a strange little fact. In some parts of the city, bakers started using carts or hiring boys with bicycles to make deliveries easier. But in the poorer wards, like yours, no one has the money for fancy carts or hired help. You are the bicycle. You are the cart. You carry everything yourself because that's how it's always been. By the time you finish the loop and stagger back into your shop, it's past midday. The sun is up, the streets are fully alive, and you're soaked with sweat, your back is twitching, and your left arm feels like it's halfway detached at the shoulder. You set the empty basket down like it's made of glass, sink into the nearest stool and let your forehead rest on the cool wood of the counter, and that's when someone walks in. "Do you have any fresh rolls?" they ask, cheerful, oblivious. You lift your head slowly, trying not to show just how close you are to giving up and building a life as a tree stump somewhere in the countryside. "No," you say, voice flat. "Next batch in 2 hours." They sigh and leave, probably to buy from someone else. You close your eyes, just for a second, just long enough to remember you still have the clean-up and the next mix and maybe a rat under the flour bin, just long enough to feel the weight of the basket still pressing into your shoulder, even though you put it down 15 minutes ago. You don't remember when it happened exactly, when the front of your shop stopped feeling like a place of business and started feeling more like a theatre stage where everyone but you thinks they're the lead actor. They come in, say their lines, make their demands and leave. Meanwhile, you're stuck playing every other role: set builder, costume designer, janitor, lighting crew and emotional sponge. The bell over the door jingles again. A woman steps inside, dragging behind her a boy with a nose full of snot and a face full of suspicion. She doesn't look around, doesn't take in the bakehouse heat still radiating from behind the curtain. She walks straight to the counter and starts poking the loaves with a gloved finger, like she's inspecting furniture for dust. "These look dry," she announces, loud enough for the street to hear. "Did you bake these today?" "You did. You always do." "Yes," you reply, tight-lipped. She sniffs. They don't smell fresh. You're about to respond, something calm, reasonable, not involving any of the curse words currently warming on your tongue, when the boy knocks over a basket of rolls and starts laughing like he's just discovered gravity. You crouch to pick them up. She does not help. This, you remind yourself, is the price of having a shop front. Visibility, convenience, judgment. Every crust you display becomes public property, inspected, criticised, occasionally stolen. If a loaf has the audacity to cool unevenly, someone will point it out. If your window is fogged from the oven heat, someone will tap it and complain. Rival bakers walk by and stare in through the glass, pretending to be casual but very obviously counting how many loaves you've sold by mid-morning. It's a bloodless form of warfare, one-upmanship in sourdough. If your crusts look too pale, they'll spread the word that your oven's failing. If they catch a whiff of too much smoke, they'll start whispering that your coals are damp and your bread tastes like chimney ash. One particularly bitter baker down the road actually had the gall to start rumours that you were using imported flour. Imported from France, of all places, as if that were a crime against the Queen herself. The scandal lasted a week, until he was caught selling short-weight loaves to the parish orphanage. You didn't gloat, but you did whistle a little louder that day. It's not just rival bakers and customers with too much time. You also have to deal with the landlady, who appears like clockwork at the end of every month, sniffing around like she can detect overdue rent by scent alone. She pokes the baseboards, runs a hand over your display shelf and always manages to find something to tisk about. "You know," she says far too often, "if you can't keep the windows clear, people will think you've got something to hide." Yes, like a criminal flour ring. The reality is the windows fog because the oven breathes like a dragon, and the street outside is colder than a politician's heart. It's basic science. but explaining that to someone who's never baked anything more complicated than a sponge cake is an exercise in futility. And don't get started on the neighbourhood children, a rotating cast of grubby-faced urchins with pockets full of pebbles and the moral compass of seagulls. They press their noses to the glass and stare at the loaves with wide eyes, and yes, some of them are genuinely hungry, but others are just waiting for you to turn your back so they can nick a roll and bolt like rats. Once you chased one down the alley with a wooden spoon, slipped in horse dung, landed flat on your back. The spoon broke. The kid escaped. You limped for 3 days. Still, you can't be too hard on them. You were that kid once, watching from the outside, wishing you had 2 pennies to rub together. You've handed out your share of end crusts, accidentally dropped loaves, told hungry children to guard this for me, and walked away. But you can't do that every day. Not with margins this thin. Not when your own stomach grumbles most mornings louder than the bakehouse kettle. And speaking of the kettle, it's finally boiling. You pour yourself a cup of what might generously be called tea. It's the colour of dishwater and tastes faintly of rust, but it's hot and wet, and that's good enough. You take a slow sip, eyes closed, leaning against the counter. But peace is a temporary visitor in your life. "Oi, baker," a voice calls from the doorway. It's Mr. Henley, the grocer next door, puffing like he's just fought his way through a stampede. "Someone said your bread was seen in the gutter outside number 12. You blink. "What?" "In the gutter," he repeats, "near the lamppost. Half a loaf just sitting there like garbage." Your first instinct is to worry. What if someone dropped it? What if it was one of yours? Then you remember. That's the same house that ordered 5 loaves last week, then tried to haggle the price down after they'd eaten half of them. "It was probably discarded," you mutter. "Still," Henley huffs, "makes the whole street look bad." He storms off, offended on behalf of the entire neighbourhood. You sigh, take another sip of your tea, and consider the logistics of moving your entire business to a mountaintop where no one has opinions and bread cools in silence. There's a scholarly theory floating around that Victorian shopkeepers developed a kind of emotional armour, hardened by constant exposure to public scrutiny, class tension, and the ever-present fear of reputational ruin. You think that's only partly true. Armour would suggest you're invincible, but really you just get good at swallowing the frustration, baking it into your loaves, and pretending it gives the crust more character. By the time the sun shifts across the shop front and your tea has gone cold, you've dealt with a man complaining that his loaf was too symmetrical, and a girl asking if your buns are as nice as the ones from the shop with the striped awning. You smile, you answer, you carry on. Because this isn't just baking, it's performance, it's politics, it's public relations in an apron, and you're on stage every day until the curtain falls. By the time the last customer stumbles out with a bag of rolls and a complaint about the price, despite it being the exact same price it's been for months, you finally get a moment to yourself. Not a restful moment. Not a blissful, sit down and breathe moment. Number. This is more of a lean on the counter and stare into the abyss kind of moment. Your lower back has fully given up its will to live. Your shoulders feel like you've been carrying sacks of bricks instead of flour. And your spine? You're pretty sure it's permanently shaped like a crescent roll. You ease yourself onto the stool you keep behind the counter, the one with the cracked seat and a nail that occasionally reminds you it exists by jabbing you in the thigh. This is the first time today you've been off your feet for longer than a blink. You try not to sigh too loudly, because the universe has a habit of hearing that, and immediately sending another customer or disaster your way. The silence creeps in, a strange thing after the endless din of the bakehouse and the foot traffic outside. It's in these rare moments of quiet that your body reminds you just how much you've put it through. Your knees throb in sync with your heartbeat. Your wrists are so stiff you have to open and close your hands slowly, like you're testing whether your fingers still remember how to move. You glance at the work table, where flour has settled in pale dunes, tiny swirls marking where dough was rolled, shaped, and fought into submission. You glance at the broom leaning in the corner, mocking you with its promise of another hour of sweeping. You glance at the stairs to the rooms above. Technically your living quarters, realistically a storage loft with a straw-stuffed mattress that smells faintly of yeast and regret. There's a common misconception that bakers are somehow sturdier than other tradespeople, that all the kneading and lifting and firing has carved you into something resilient, tough, immune to the usual aches and pains. And maybe it's true for the first few years. But once the damage starts to add up, it never really stops. It settles in deep, becomes part of your daily rhythm, like the creak in your knees when you climb stairs, or the twinge in your hip when you stand too long. You think about the other bakers you know, the older ones. Most of them have spines that bend like question marks. They walk with a shuffle, one hand always resting on a sore spot. Hip, back, shoulder. You once saw an old master baker roll out dough using his forearms because arthritis had fused half his fingers. He didn't complain, just muttered that the dough doesn't care how you knead it so long as you do. That man died in his shop sitting up mid-knead, loaf in one hand, rolling pin in the other. Part of you thinks that's a dignified way to go, part of you finds it horrifying. You try to stretch, mistake. Your entire spine pops like a bundle of kindling. The pain is brief, but sharp. You blink through it, exhale slowly, and accept that you'll probably feel like this until you either retire or become bread yourself. Another curious fact, though not particularly comforting, a number of Victorian health journals from the time actually listed baking as a musculoskeletal risk profession. Of course, they mostly said that in the same breath as recommending leeches or vapour baths as cures. The general advice for bakers with back pain was to walk briskly in open air. You'd love to. But you're not sure the 10 feet between your shop and the alley count as open air when it smells like sewage and yesterday's cabbage. You finally rise from the stool with the grace of a man 20 years older than he is and shuffle into the back room. This is where the real suffering happens. The flour sacks are stacked against one wall, heavy and sagging. You've got a few empty ones crumpled near the door, too worn for reuse but not worth tossing just yet. Your broom waits for you, patient and accusatory. The floor's a battlefield. Flour, soot, and sticky patches of dough that the apprentice somehow manages to step in daily without noticing. You bend to pick up a dropped cloth and feel the familiar pull in your lower back. Not sharp, just that dull, deep ache that says, we're still here and we're still mad. You try to remember the last time you had a real rest, not just a nap stolen between baking and deliveries, a proper break, maybe an afternoon by the river, maybe just a long sleep without being jolted awake by the memory of bread left too long to proof. You can't remember. That's how long it's been. People don't think about this part. They imagine baking as romantic, warm light, golden crusts, the smell of cinnamon and comfort. And sure, those things exist, briefly. But behind it is a grind that wears you down, reshapes you, turns you into something hard and tired. You begin to measure time not in hours but in batches, in how many more your hands can handle before they give out. And then there's the posture, hunched over dough, bent at the oven, stooped to sweep, to lift, to carry. You haven't stood fully straight in months, maybe years. If you ever tried, you'd probably hear your spine crack like a baguette. There's a joke among older bakers that if you can still touch your toes after 40, you haven't been kneading hard enough. No one laughs when they say it. You don't laugh either. The apprentice wanders in, chewing something. You hear that noise? He asks, mouth full. What noise? He shrugs. Thought I heard something under the floorboards. You stare at him for a moment, wondering what fresh nightmare this might be. A rat, a burst pipe, a family of possums renting out space beneath your proving bench. You sigh, shake your head, decide it's a problem for future you. Current you's too exhausted to face any more surprises. You send the boy to sweep the front and return to the bakehouse. Your next batch of dough is resting, half-proofed and looking lazy. You should shape it soon, but instead, you rest your hands on the table and lean forward, stretching out your back just enough to stop it from seizing completely. Outside, someone calls a greeting as they pass. You don't recognize the voice, but you nod out of habit. Every baker has a neighborhood reputation, and yours, if you're lucky, is quiet, consistent, and still upright. You can live with that, because at the end of the day, your body may feel like it's been slow roasted and then folded in half, but the bread still gets made, the customers still come, the work still matters, and that, you remind yourself, is reason enough to keep standing. Even if it hurts, you don't really think about the air until it changes. Most of the time, it's just there, thick with flour dust, warm with oven heat, tinged with the permanent scent of yeast and old wood. You breathe it without noticing, lungs working through clouds of whatever's floating in the bakery atmosphere. But sometimes, like now, the air gets heavier, like someone turned up the coal smoke and forgot to open a window. You pause mid-knead, brow furrowed. The dough under your hands has just started to come together, soft, stretchy, warm from your palms, but your chest feels tighter than usual, like you're dragging the air in through wet cloth. You cough once, then again. Then you realise your apprentice is coughing too from the front room. You glance up toward the small vent above the oven. A faint black trail is curling out like a ghost. The chimney's choking again. Of course it is. You mutter something impolite and wipe your hands on your apron as you march out to the side of the building, where the chimney pipe juts from the wall like the snout of some beast you forgot to feed. A thick plume of smoke is sputtering out at odd intervals, like the oven's throwing a tantrum. You know that cough. Dry, irregular, angry. It means soot's building up. Again. You should have cleaned it last week. You meant to clean it last week. But between the broken flour scale and the endless loop of deliveries and the bread riot incident, chimney maintenance got bumped off the top of your survival list. Now it's come back for revenge. Back inside, the air is grittier by the minute. You tell the apprentice to prop the door open, grab the soot rake, and brace yourself for one of the most unpleasant tasks in the entire profession, chimney scraping. The soot rake is a long, awkward thing, like a twisted metal claw on the end of a broom handle. You jab it up through the clean-out hatch, teeth gritting as you hit resistance. Then you pull. Black flakes fall like devil's snow, coating everything in their path. Walls, floor, your already filthy apron. Some gets in your mouth. You spit. It helps nothing. And the smell. Lord, the smell. A mix of old coal, damp ashes, and something faintly metallic, like someone tried to bake a railroad spike. It clings to your nostrils, sinks into your sleeves. You'll still be tasting it at midnight. This isn't just gross. It's dangerous. Bakehouse fires are no joke. More than one baker you've known has lost their shop to a runaway chimney flame. Soot ignites fast. Faster than you'd think. Faster than you're ready for. A spark catches, the build-up burns, and suddenly your life's work is a pile of cinders. And the city won't mourn. It'll just shrug, slap a fine on your ashes, and move on. There's a long-running debate among trade reformers over who's to blame for so many bakehouse fires. The bakers for not maintaining equipment, or the landlords for providing crumbling infrastructure. The answer is both, of course. The bakehouse system is a loop of neglect. You rent from someone who barely spends a coin on repairs, and you're so overworked you don't have the hours, or the tools, to fix it yourself. You pull out another clump of soot, a big one. It lands with a damp plop that makes the apprentice gag. You don't even flinch. This isn't the worst thing you've dealt with this month, not even close. After half an hour, the chimney's drawing again. Barely. Enough to keep the smoke from choking you out at least. You sweep the soot into a bucket, slap the lid back on the clean-out, and stand there for a second, breathing as shallowly as possible, watching the faint curl of clean smoke rise through the flue. Crisis averted. You wash your hands, scrub them raw honestly, and get back to the dough. It's overproofed now, a little slack, a little too soft but workable. You start shaping, rolling each piece with practiced hands that ignore the sting of cracked skin and soot-grimed knuckles. Sometimes you wonder what your lungs look like. You've been breathing this mixture of flour dust and smoke for years. The walls of the bakehouse are painted in it, a permanent film that no amount of scrubbing removes. And your body? Probably no cleaner on the inside. There's a cough that visits you in the cold months. Deep, rattling, always worse in the mornings. You ignore it, like you ignore the back pain, the burns, the fact that your hand seize up if you hold a pen too long. Baker's lung. It's not a phrase people use much outside the trade, but it's real, caused by inhaling fine flour particles day after day, year after year. It thickens your breath, clogs your chest, turns your lungs into something brittle and scarred. But what choice do you have? Not baking? Laughable? Breathing less? Not an option. A few years ago, a wealthy reformer came through your ward, toured the bakehouses with a little notebook and a look on her face like she'd just stepped in something unpleasant. She gave a speech afterward about improving working conditions, about modernising equipment, about airflow and ventilation. Lovely ideas, no money, no help, just words. You finish shaping the loaves and set them to rise. The oven's heat has evened out now, less angry. It breathes in rhythm again, like it's forgiven you for neglecting its flue. You close your eyes and rest your hands on the edge of the work table. The apprentice pipes up. Do you think all this smoke is bad for us? You open one eye. Of course it is. He frowns. Then why don't we wear something? Like a scarf or a mask? You let out a breath that's halfway to a laugh. Because we're bakers. Not doctors. or aristocrats, we don't have the luxury of pretending it matters. He goes quiet, starts sweeping again, more gently this time, like he's trying not to disturb the air. You glance at the bucket of soot, half full, maybe more. You'll dump it later, maybe near the river, maybe behind the tavern. It'll get kicked around, soaked by rain, forgotten like everything else that falls from the chimney of this city. You stretch your shoulders, they pop, you cough. It hurts, but only a little. The kind of little that adds up. But the loaves are rising, the oven is ready, and the door will open soon. Because you can't breathe here. Not really. But you still have bread to make. You stop noticing your own injuries after a while. They just become part of the background noise, like the rattle of the oven door or the creak of the ceiling beams. You only realise how bad it's gotten when you try to button your shirt and your hand doesn't bend the right way. Or when the seam of your apron rubs a burn that still hasn't healed. Some days you feel like a walking scab wrapped in linen. Today it's your left forearm, red, puffy, slightly shiny. A fresh burn from where the corner of a baking tin kissed you on its way out of the oven. Not a scream-worthy injury, just the kind that simmers all day, nagging, inflamed. You wrapped it this morning in a scrap of damp cloth and forgot about it until now, when the edge of a flour sack brushed against it and sent a lightning bolt straight to your spine. You hiss and peel back the cloth, it's not pretty. The skin is angry, already starting to blister. You've had worse, of course. There was the time you reached into the oven a second too soon and ended up with a latticework of burn lines from the iron rack. Or the time you slipped, caught yourself with both palms against the side of the firebox and couldn't grip anything for a week. That one scarred. Most of them do. Burns are part of the job. You bake in a brick furnace that doesn't care how careful you are. You work with trays that could sear a steak in seconds. The handle of the peel gets hot. The tins are unpredictable. And the steam, that's the silent killer. You've opened a batch of rolls before and had your eyebrows nearly taken off by a cloud of superheated mist. Now, whenever you lift a lid, you squint and lean back, half expecting the oven to punch you in the face. Victorian bakehouses weren't exactly known for their health and safety standards. There were no warning signs, no safety gear, no training. You learned by doing, and doing meant burning. Repeatedly. Scalds, rashes, cuts. If you got through a week without a fresh wound, it felt like a holiday. One of the old-timers once told you that if your apron wasn't stained with at least 3 bodily fluids by the end of the shift, you weren't working hard enough. You laughed at the time. Now you realise he was mostly serious. And it's not just the burns. The flour rash has returned too. It always comes when the weather shifts. Red patches blooming in the creases of your elbows, the back of your knees, the space where your apron strap rubs your neck raw. It itches like hell. You've tried lard, vinegar, even a poultice made from chamomile and stale tea leaves, but nothing helps. The only cure would be not working with flour, and that's not an option, is it? There's a superstition among some bakers that wearing a red thread around your wrist wards off kitchen injuries. You tried it once. The apprentice asked if you'd joined a cult. You tore it off before the end of the day, then burned your hand anyway. And still, you don't stop. You grit your teeth, soak the cloth in cold water again, rewrap the burn, and get back to shaping dough. Because nothing waits in a bakehouse. Not the yeast, not the customers, and certainly not the oven. You knead with your unburnt hand, awkwardly, like someone playing doughy piano with only 5 fingers. It's not efficient. It hurts, but you get it done. Pain becomes a companion, a permanent co-worker. You carry it with you, wear it like another layer of clothing. It's just part of the price. But sometimes, when you catch your reflection in the soot-darkened window, you wonder what you look like to someone outside this life. A man scarred, hunched, wrapped in burns and bandages, hands stained and fingers crooked. Do they see the skill, the craft, or just the wear? There's an open question among labour historians about the long-term effects of repeated baking injuries, especially burns. Some argue it shortened lifespans. Others say the body adapted, calloused itself, grew numb. You don't feel particularly adapted. You feel like a loaf that's been left too long in the oven. Hard on the outside, dry on the inside, barely holding shape. The worst part isn't even the wounds. It's the fact that you can't afford to stop working because of them. You get no days off. No one to cover your shift. If you don't bake, no one eats. And if no one eats, no one pays. And if no one pays, well, there's the landlord looming, always sniffing around for rent or reasons to raise it. There's flour to buy, coal to stock, apprentices to feed. Your pain doesn't fit into the budget. Once, a customer came in and saw the bandages on your hands. "You should take a break," she said. Sweet woman, meant well. "Maybe let someone else do it for a while." You wanted to laugh. Someone else? Who? The apprentice who can barely tell the difference between salt and sugar? The neighbour who thinks sourdough is a French disease? Number. It's you. It's always you. You pause only to check the rising dough. It's ready. You shape it quickly, pain flashing like lightning every time your hand brushes the bench, and load it into the oven. The burn flares hotter with the added heat, like it knows you're teasing it. You ignore it, like you always do, and still, somehow, despite everything, the bread comes out right. Golden, blistered, steam rising in ribbons. You lift the first loaf, fingers trembling, and place it on the rack to cool. That's the strange thing about this job. No matter how battered you are, no matter how many wounds you carry, the bread doesn't care. It just rises, it bakes, it cools, it waits, and when the doorbell jingles again and someone steps in smiling, saying, "Oh, that smells wonderful," you smile back, as if your hand isn't wrapped in wet linen, as if your skin isn't slowly fusing with your apron, as if you're not slowly being carved away, one burn at a time. "Fresh out of the oven," you say, voice steady, hands blistered, bread perfect. There's a certain moment, usually just before sunset, when the bakery slows down enough that you can actually hear the quiet. Not silence. There's always some clatter, always the soft hiss of the oven cooling, the creak of the floorboards, the distant echo of wheels in the street, but quiet, in the way a lullaby hums just beneath the noise. It should be peaceful, should be a reward. But today, all it does is make you aware of every little thing you've lost. You're counting the last few loaves of the day when you notice something's missing. One loaf. It was there just a moment ago. You turn in place, scanning the shelf, checking the work table, even lifting a proving cloth in case your brain has finally snapped and you've started hiding your own bread from yourself. Nothing. Then the door rattles open and you catch a blur out of the corner of your eye. A scrawny figure bolting down the street, barefoot, shirt torn, arms tight around a stolen loaf. You don't even have to think, you just know another hungry kid. You don't chase him, not this time. Instead, you stand there with your hands on your hips, watching him disappear into the shadows beyond the last gas lamp. You feel something complicated in your chest. Not rage, not quite sadness, more like the ache of inevitability. Because this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Bread theft is baked into your daily routine by now. You used to get angry, used to storm into the street, waving your rolling pin, shouting like it made a difference. But shouting doesn't fill stomachs, and you've come to understand that the city's hunger has 1,000 faces, most of them small, pale, and desperate. You return to the counter, make a note of the missing loaf, again, and start putting things away. This is the part no one sees. The tidying, the prep for tomorrow, the sweeping of flour into corners you'll re-dirty by morning. Every stolen roll, every half loaf gone missing is one more dent in your earnings. A few pence here, a few more there. It adds up. And the city never gives those losses back. Not in kindness, not in coin. Still, you get it. You understand that kind of hunger. It's not about cravings or skipping lunch. It's that cold, gnawing ache that sits behind the ribs and keeps you awake at night, that turns you into someone you don't recognize. You've been there. When you were just a boy, sleeping in a cellar, sneaking crusts from the shop you were apprenticed in, hoping the master wouldn't notice a heel missing off the back rack. He did notice. He beat you for it. Told you that bakers make bread, they don't eat it. You can still hear his voice sometimes, even now. So no, you don't blame the boy. You just hope he got far enough not to be caught. There's an ongoing debate in the papers about whether or not bakeries should give away their unsold bread at the end of the day. Reformers argue it's a moral duty, that no child should starve with fresh loaves cooling behind a locked door. Shopkeepers say it encourages theft, ruins sales, makes customers wait to see what'll be handed out for free. You say, we're already feeding people, every day, often at cost to ourselves. No one else seems to understand that. You once tried setting aside a few loaves near closing time, handing them out discreetly. No questions, no shame. Word got out. By the end of the week, you had a line down the block. Half were hungry, the other half were just clever. One man took a free loaf, then tried to sell it back to you the next day. You stopped the giveaway after that. Not because you stopped caring, but because you couldn't afford to care that loudly. The bakehouse isn't a charity. It can't be. The margins are too thin, the flour too costly, the coal always running out. You've patched your roof with tin and prayer, and you're one broken oven hinge away from shutting down entirely. Generosity is a luxury you don't have. And yet, when you see those kids crouching by the window, eyes wide, breath fogging the glass, you remember. Not just being hungry, but feeling invisible. Like no one saw you except to call you trouble. So maybe that's why you keep losing the occasional loaf. Maybe that's why the back door isn't always latched. Maybe you let it happen. On purpose. You'd never say it aloud. But you know, there's a fringe story you once heard, passed down between bakers, about a man who baked an extra loaf every night, just one, and left it on a windowsill. Said it was for the ghost of the streets, whatever that meant. Supposedly, no one ever saw who took it, but the baker never missed a loaf to theft again. People said it was superstition, a ward against crime, a clever trick. You think it was just kindness. Quiet, anonymous kindness. The kind that asks nothing in return. You glance at your own windowsill, just empty crusts and ash. Maybe someday. You finish locking up the shop, the bolt clicking into place like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The street outside is dim now, lit only by gas lamps casting long shadows across the cobblestones. You breathe in the cold air. It tastes cleaner than the bakehouse, but not by much. Somewhere a woman sings off-key to a baby. A cart rattles by. A dog barks once, then falls silent. The city doesn't sleep. It rests in shifts, one life winding down while another gears up. But you're always somewhere in between, caught in the hours after everyone else's dinner and before their breakfast, the unseen bridge. You rub your hands together, the skin dry, cracking at the knuckles. The burn from earlier still pulses gently under its cloth bandage. You press it, wince, and start the walk back through the alley to your tiny room above the shop. No one says goodnight. No one ever does. There's just the hum of the oven cooling behind the brick wall, the faint scent of scorched flour that clings to your clothes, your skin, your very breath. You'll sleep soon, not long, just enough to wake up and do it all again. You lie down in the scratchy cot, close your eyes and think about that boy with the loaf. Where he's gone, if he's warm, if he'll come back tomorrow. You hope he does. There's a strange irony in what you do. You bake the same bread for everyone, the rich and the poor, the shopkeepers and the chimney sweeps, the governesses and the mud-caked boys selling matches on the street corner. Same flour, same water, same heat. But when it lands on the table, it means something entirely different depending on who's holding the knife. You see it every day. Mrs. Weatherby, who lives in the White House on the Hill, wants her bread delicate. She sends her maid at precisely 7:05 a.m, requesting a fine white loaf, well-rounded, thin crust, none of that rustic nonsense. She doesn't want to see the bakehouse, doesn't care how many hours it took to make, just wants a product. Something pure, dainty, suitable for slicing into polite wedges for her breakfast table. That loaf will be buttered, spread with jam, nibbled politely while someone reads aloud from the newspaper. Then, 20 minutes later, a coal-stained man walks in with a cap in his hands and asks, without looking up, if there are any yesterday's loaves he can buy for half price. You point him to the day-olds, stacked on a side shelf, and he picks the sturdiest one he can find. No complaints, no special requests. He doesn't care if it's pale or cracked or a little dry. That loaf will be dunked in broth, split 4 ways, eaten in silence around a small table under a leaky roof. Same bread, different worlds, and you're right in the middle, straddling the line between crust and crumb, feeding them all. You start to notice things after a while, not just what people buy, but how they ask for it. The wealthy talk about bread like it's decoration. The poor talk about it like it's fuel. For some it's taste, for others it's survival. It's all bread, but it carries weight. There's a small girl, 5 or 6 maybe, who comes in with her mother every few days. The mother is always exhausted, worn down in that way you only see in people trying to hold a family together on 3 shillings and no sleep. But the girl, she always presses her nose to the glass display and smiles at the rolls like they're magic. You give her one sometimes. Pretend you overbaked it. Her mother always protests. You always wave her off. You're not a saint, but you're not heartless either. And maybe you remember what it was like to see something warm and golden and think, just for a moment, that the world isn't so terrible. There's debate in the editorials and drawing rooms about whether the poor even deserve better bread. One paper ran a column recently suggesting that giving working families fine white loaves was a waste of resources, that they wouldn't appreciate the texture or flavour, and that rougher bread suited their constitution. The writer, undoubtedly someone whose hands had never touched dough, insisted that moral character could be measured by one's choice of bread. You nearly choked on your tea reading it. Because you know the truth. The rougher bread isn't a choice. It's what's left. Brown, bran heavy, hard crusted, made from coarser flour that's cheaper to buy and harder to work with. You bake it because it costs less. You sell it because it's all some people can afford. It doesn't mean they don't want the fine stuff. It just means they've stopped expecting it. Sometimes you sneak a better loaf into someone's order. A mother with 3 kids and hollow cheeks. An old man who pays in farthings and buttons. You swap it when no one's looking. They never say anything, but they come back. And in their eyes, just for a second, you see something that's not quite gratitude, but close. But then there's the other side of it. A gentleman came in last week, boots polished, gloves clean, and ordered 2 of your best loaves. You wrapped them carefully, handed them over. He paused, sniffed, then said, "I assume these were baked with filtered water?" You told him the truth. Clean well water, boiled before use. He frowned. Paid anyway. Walked out like he'd just bought a box of nails. You later found one of the loaves tossed in the gutter 3 streets down, untouched. And that, right there, is the gut punch. You spend hours, tending dough, sweating over ovens, burning your hands, throwing out loaves that didn't rise quite right. You lose sleep, you lose skin, and someone takes your best effort and discards it like it's nothing. Still, you don't stop, because for every one of him, there are a dozen people who see what you do and feel it. Even if they never say a word, even if they just tear into the crust with their teeth and walk away without so much as a nod. There's a rumour, maybe half true, maybe not, that during the last wheat shortage, some bakers in the fancier districts started hoarding white flour for their wealthy clients. Let the rest eat chalky blends or old rye. You never did that. You couldn't afford to. Your shop doesn't have client tiers. It has whoever walks through the door. You might sell to ladies in gloves and gents with pocket watches, but you'll also sell to a kid with 3 pence and a dream. Bread, in your shop, is for everyone. But the crust always tells the story. Soft and golden for the drawing rooms, tough and browned for the cellars, and you, standing at the oven shaping both, bearing witness to the quiet class war that unfolds in crumbs and crusts. You don't talk about it. Not to the apprentice, not to the customers, not even to yourself most days. But deep down, you know. Every loaf you bake is a quiet rebellion against the way the world divides people. Because if bread is the great equalizer, then by God you're doing your part to make sure someone out there gets one good meal, no matter what they wear on their feet. And tomorrow you'll do it again. Same flour, same fire, different lives. Word count 1101. Awaiting continue. Section 20. There's a funny little lie the world likes to tell itself, that skilled labourers like you are somehow just a step above scoundrels, respectable enough to be needed, but not respectable enough to be valued. You see it every day in the way people speak to you, flat, clipped, like they're ordering wood by the pound or coal by the sack. Never mind that you're crafting the one thing that keeps half this city standing upright. To them, you're a service, not a person, a fixture, like a lamppost or a boot scraper. You're not quite poor, but not wealthy, not a gentleman, not a peasant. You're caught in that awkward Victorian limbo known as the trades, a place where hard work is expected, pride is discouraged, and upward mobility is the stuff of serialised fiction. There was a time you thought baking might be a path to something better, not wealth, necessarily, but standing, respect. You'd own your own shop, wear a clean apron, maybe shake hands with merchants instead of grovelling before them. That dream was younger than you are now, pre-burns, pre-broken sleep, pre-realisation. The truth hit slowly, like a leaky roof. At first it was just little things, being ignored in a conversation, overlooked at a community meeting, brushed off by the mayor's assistant when you tried to suggest price controls on flour. Then came the casual slights, customers counting their change twice, inspecting your loaves like you might have hidden something in them, or asking if you were new to the trade, despite the flour permanently etched into the lines of your palms. You stopped expecting recognition. Not because you don't deserve it, but because the system's designed to keep you humble. Too humble. Tradesmen are meant to be invisible, reliable, uncomplaining. Your job is to produce and disappear, smile politely when spoken to, nod when corrected, accept when dismissed. There's a term that gets thrown around sometimes, honest work. You hear it all the time from people who've never lifted a flour sack in their lives. They say it like it's praise, but it always lands like a warning. You do honest work, which translates roughly to, don't expect more than what you've got. Honest work doesn't get promotions, honest work doesn't go to dinner parties, honest work stays behind the counter, hands dirty, head down. Meanwhile, the people who sell books about bread, or make speeches about bread reform, or draw cartoons about adulterated bread, they get called experts. You bake it, they lecture about it. Guess who gets invited to Parliament? One time, a travelling writer came through the ward. He was working on a book about London's working class. You remember it clearly because he stepped into your shop, looked around, and said, "Ah, the noble baker, salt of the earth." Then he bought a bun, asked you 3 vague questions, and walked out without even asking your name. He probably wrote a chapter about you titled The Humble Craftsman, filled with observations about your grimy apron and stoic nature. You never saw him again. And then there's the way people treat your shop like it's beneath them. Not everyone, but enough to sting. Some rush through the door like the smell might stain their coats. Others pinch the bread like it personally offended them. You once had a lady ask if you sanitize the oven regularly, as if fire wasn't already doing the job. And of course, there's always someone trying to bargain, like you're selling produce at a country fair. 2 loaves for 3 pence, they say. I'll be a regular. You are a regular, you think. A regular problem. You nod, say, sorry. Stick to your price. They frown, mutter something about your attitude, and leave. They'll be back. They always come back. No one else on this street bakes rolls that crisp. But it wears you down, doesn't it? That slow erosion of dignity. You don't need parades. You're not asking for applause. But a little recognition wouldn't kill anyone. Maybe just once someone could say, "This is good work," without sounding surprised. You remember the way your mother used to talk about bakers, like they were magicians. They turn dust into food, she'd say. How marvellous is that? She meant it. You believed her. It's why you got into the trade in the first place. Now standing in this cramped shop surrounded by soot, your skin dry and your knees aching, you wonder if she'd still see magic in you. You glance at the back table where a fresh batch of loaves is cooling. They are good, not just decent, not passable. Good. Golden tops, firm crusts, soft centres. You know bread. You understand it. You can tell when dough is too dry just by touching the flour. You can smell when a loaf is 5 minutes from burning without looking. Your body knows the rhythm of the oven better than it knows rest. There's power in that, even if no one else sees it. Even if your name isn't printed on shop signs or featured in pamphlets. Even if your obituary someday reads simply "Baker, age unknown." A professor once said that tradesmen like you were the skeletal structure of the Victorian city, largely unseen, absolutely essential. It was meant as a compliment, but it sounded like a eulogy. Still, you show up. Every day. You unlock the door. You light the oven. You carry flour sacks and feed apprentices and knead until your elbows crack. You burn your hands. You scrape the soot. You stand behind the counter, offering something warm to people who think they're better than you, and you do it again the next day, and the next. Because even if the city never thanks you, it needs you, and maybe that's enough. Maybe being the skeleton isn't so bad. Someone has to hold everything up. Section 21. You've started dreaming of the oven. Not in a mystical, symbolic way. There's no poetic vision of fire or transformation. No metaphor dancing in the flames. Just the literal hot, groaning brick beast that squats in the centre of your world. In the dream, you're kneeling in front of it, peel in hand, and no matter how many loaves you pull out, there's always one more. And the heat, it keeps rising, until your skin begins to blister. Until the air turns thick and you can't tell if you're breathing or burning. Then you wake up, sweating, heart hammering, the faint scent of scorched dough still clinging to your pillow like guilt. You never used to have those dreams. Back when you were young and your arms still worked without complaint. Back when you believed in things like rest and weekends and futures. Now, sleep feels like a short layover between rounds. You close your eyes for 4 hours and wake up as sore as you were when you went to bed, only with the added bonus of crusted eyelids and a neck that's locked itself in protest. There are no days off. Not really. The shop doesn't close, not unless someone dies. And even then, you're expected to have the morning batch out before you go to the funeral. You've heard stories of bakers collapsing mid-mix, apron still tied, hands flour white. And what do people say? What a shame. But the bread was good. You've come close once or twice. There was that week when you had the fever. Not strong enough to kill you, just enough to melt your bones and cloud your vision. You still worked, half delirious, sweat-soaked, hallucinating that the loaves were whispering to you. You nearly passed out on top of the oven. You don't even remember shaping the bread that day, but somehow it came out right. The muscle memory is stronger than your immune system. That's the thing they don't tell you when you start. The job never stops. It owns you. It claims your schedule, your meals, your muscles, your breath. It bleeds into every crack of your life until there's no line between who you are and what you do. You're not just someone who bakes, you are a baker. And once that takes hold, it doesn't let go. The oven, though, the oven is something else entirely. It's not just a tool, it's a tyrant. A living furnace with moods and needs and threats. If you stoke it too much, it punishes you with scorched bottoms. Too little, and your loaves emerge pale and limp like deflated egos. The temperature dances constantly. No knobs, no gauges, just intuition and panic. You've learned to read it the way others read faces. The smell of the coals, the pitch of the crackle, the way the flame licks at the back wall. These are your signposts. You don't control the oven. You negotiate with it. Sometimes beg, occasionally curse. You've shouted at it more than a few times, as if it might suddenly develop a conscience and say, "My apologies, I'll brown more evenly next time." Victorian ovens aren't built with kindness in mind. They're brick kilns with cast iron jaws, and most of them haven't been serviced since Queen Victoria was in her 20s. Yours is a patched-together beast with more cracks than a frozen lake. You've stuffed the gaps with a mix of plaster, desperation and old prayer scraps. The flue clogs, the hinges creak. The firebox door doesn't quite latch, so you prop it shut with a stone. It's not beautiful, but it works, mostly. There's a fringe theory among oven builders that the best brick ovens develop a kind of memory, that over time they learn your habits, adjust themselves to your timing, your rhythm, your dough. You want to believe that. You want to think your oven knows you by now, knows your limits, knows that when you pause mid-batch it should hold steady instead of flaring up in rebellion. But then again, last Thursday it burned an entire tray of cobs while you were trying to explain to a customer why their sixpence wouldn't cover 2 sourdoughs. So maybe it's just spiteful. You run your hand along its side sometimes when it's cooling down. The bricks radiate warmth even hours later, like they're storing secrets. You wonder how many hands have touched this same oven before you. How many bakers stoked these same coals, cursed these same hinges, wept over collapsed petards at 2 a.m. You wonder if they dreamed of it too. Your apprentice fears the oven. Won't admit it, of course, but you can see it in the way he flinches when the flame flares, the way he holds the peel like it might bite him. You're trying to teach him, to make him respect the fire without fearing it. It's a delicate line, one that burns most people, figuratively or otherwise. You tell him, it's not about strength, it's about timing, about knowing when the dough is ready, when the heat is too much, when to open the door and when to wait. He nods, he tries, he messes it up. You bite your tongue and let him learn the hard way. That's how you learned. And of course the oven doesn't care about your mood. Whether you're grieving or angry or tired to your bones, it still wants feeding, still wants fire, still wants you to kneel in front of it, like it's some ancient god demanding sacrifice. Which frankly it is. There's a reason bakers are so often described with religious language. You worship this process. The mixing, the waiting, the rising, the shaping, the baking. It's a ritual. Daily, sacred, violent, and the oven is your altar, or your confessional, or your punishment, depending on the day. You close the door now, the final loaf inside for tonight. The iron groans, sealing it in. The fire dances behind it. You sit back on your stool, exhausted, staring into the flickering orange light that leaks through the vent. Your face is streaked with soot. Your fingers throb. Your knees are shot. And yet here you are, praying in your own way, to the flame that gives your work meaning. You'll never be rid of it. Not in life, not in death. You'll see it in your sleep, feel it in your bones, smell it on your skin. Even after you've washed 10 times, the oven stays with you. Always. Section 22. There's a certain kind of silence that descends after the last loaf leaves the oven. It's not peaceful exactly. It's not restful. It's more like the bakery holding its breath. Everything's done, technically. The final batch is cooling on the racks. The fire's been choked down to glowing coals. The apprentice has gone home, thank God. The door's locked, the shop's empty, and outside the street has sunk into that twilight lull when even the rats move slower. You're still standing, but only barely. The soles of your boots feel like they've melted into the floor. Your arms are jelly. Your spine crackles every time you shift weight. But it's over for tonight. And this strange, hollow stillness creeps into your chest. Not satisfaction, not pride, just the absence of tasks. It feels foreign. You almost don't know what to do with it. So you stay where you are. Leaning against the bench, hands resting on the edge of a cooling tray, letting the heat seep into your fingertips like a slow apology for everything you've put them through. You glance down at one of the loaves. A good one. Solid crust, golden colour, perfect rise. You don't even remember shaping it. That's how deep your muscle memory runs. Your body bakes even when your mind is somewhere else. You break off a piece. It's still warm, and when you bite into it, the crust gives way with a soft crackle. Steam rises from the torn middle, and for a moment you remember why you do this. Just for a flicker, a flash of flavour and texture and warmth in your mouth, you remember that bread is more than survival. It can also be comfort, familiarity, a brief return to something human. You sit down. Finally. The stool lets out a sound like it might collapse under the weight of your day. You don't care. You could fall asleep right here, slumped against the table, surrounded by the faint aroma of flour and fire. But your brain, traitor that it is, won't let you drift off just yet. It's too busy churning. It's always like this after a long day. Your thoughts unwind in messy spirals. You think about everything and nothing at once. Did you remember to bank the fire? What was that clanging noise earlier in the alley? Why did the rye loaf split down the side like that? Did the widow who bought the crusty white look paler than usual? Did you overcharge the old sailor? Or did he just give you the wrong coin? These thoughts swirl until they all dissolve into one big question you're too tired to ask. How long can I keep doing this? You don't have an answer. You just sit there, chewing your cooling bread, pretending it's a proper meal and not the only thing you've eaten all day. There's a joke among tradespeople. Retirement is just death with a better lunch. Bakers don't retire. You've never known one who did. They work until their knees give out, or their backs fold, or their heart decides it's had enough. And even then, they hang around the shop, offering advice no one asked for, poking the dough like it still belongs to them. You don't want to become that guy, but you also don't know how to not be a baker. This life doesn't have a next step, there's no ladder to climb. You run the shop, that's the top. And even that's just a balancing act between rent, repairs, ingredients, and your own health. One disaster, one flood, one broken oven door, and it could all vanish. You'd be nobody again. Just another man with flour on his boots and nowhere to go. There's an open question among social thinkers about the dignity of labour, especially for trades like yours. Is it enough to do good work if that work never lifts you higher? Some say yes. Some say the act itself is noble. Others argue it's a trap, that romanticising hard work just keeps the poor too busy to protest. You don't know which side you fall on, probably somewhere in the middle. You believe in what you do, but that doesn't mean you want to die doing it. The bread cools beside you. You glance at the rows of loaves, each one a little monument to the hours you've just lost to heat and sweat and noise. None of them will last more than a day. Most will be eaten before dawn, crumbs by morning, gone like they were never here. And that's what really gets you if you let it. Not the pain, not the hours, not even the smoke in your lungs. It's the ephemeralness of it all. You pour yourself into this work, day after day, year after year, and there's nothing to show for it except crusts and calluses. No legacy, no record, no plaque on the wall saying this man fed a city. You remember once seeing a statue in a public square, some military hero cast in bronze, one arm outstretched, sword in hand. He probably led a campaign, took a hill, signed something important. And sure, fine, maybe he did, but he didn't make bread. He didn't stand in a bakehouse for 30 years making sure that babies had their breakfast, and drunks had their sobering crusts, and old widows had something warm to hold in winter. There's no statue for that, and maybe there should be. Maybe it should look like you, soot-smudged, arms crossed, apron streaked, one eyebrow raised like you're judging someone's kneading technique. Not glorious, just real. But instead, you'll fade, like every baker before you, like a crust left out too long, and the shop will go to someone else, or no one, and people will forget the name on the door, and the city will keep chewing through bread like it always does, never thinking about the hands that shaped it. Still, you show up, You always show up. You rise from the stool with a groan, brush the crumbs from your shirt and glance around one last time before heading upstairs. You don't bother cleaning everything tonight. You'll just dirty it again tomorrow. Better to leave it lived in, like a promise. You step through the curtain, up the narrow stairs into your tiny room. The window's cracked open. The city sighs outside. And for a moment, just a moment, you let yourself imagine a different life. Then you close the window, lie down fully clothed, and let the silence carry you under. Section 23. There's a brutal kind of betrayal in the way your body reacts to your alarm clock now. If you can even call that battered iron bell an alarm and not some medieval torture device. You hear it ring in the dark, not quite dawn, and for a brief second you lie there hoping it's a dream. That maybe it's Sunday. That maybe someone else can handle the mixing and kneading and baking today. Then reality floods in with the same charm as a bucket of cold dishwater, and you remember there are no days off, not for you. You sit up. Everything creaks. Your knees sound like dry branches. Your back screams before you even touch the floor. Your right wrist, the one you burned earlier this week, has stiffened overnight into a curled claw, and you have to massage it open like some cursed relic. It's always like this. Sleep doesn't restore you anymore. It just dulls the edge. Just enough for you to climb back into the ring for another round with dough and fire. You shuffle to the wash basin and splash your face. Cold water, same as always. No fancy plumbing, no hot taps. You rinse your eyes, squint into the cracked mirror, and see a face so familiar it's starting to look like a caricature. Deep lines, soot-smudged skin, a beard that needs trimming but never gets the attention. You look like someone who just came back from a war no one bothered to record. And in a way, you did. Downstairs, the bakehouse is already stuffy. The oven holds heat like a grudge. You light the fire again, same as every morning, feeding in coals and fanning the embers until the flames start licking up the bricks. The first blast of warmth hits your face, and even though it burns, it's also a strange kind of comfort. You know this pain. It's familiar, predictable, unlike your own body. Because lately the betrayal has deepened. You're not just sore anymore, you're off kilter. Your balance is shaky. Sometimes your legs go numb when you stand too long. You've dropped things. A bag of flour here, a tray of rolls there. Once, horrifyingly, a whole pan of just-baked brioche, which splattered like a crime scene across the tiles. You cursed so loudly, the apprentice didn't speak to you for 2 days. It's the sleep deprivation. Has to be. Years of getting up before the sun, of falling asleep long after the last loaf has cooled. You've forgotten what a full night's rest feels like. Sometimes, when you sit down for 5 minutes during the rise, your eyes slam shut without warning. The world vanishes. You wake up mid-snore with your head on the workbench and a flour imprint on your forehead. The apprentice finds this hilarious. You find it terrifying. Sleep has become your lifelong adversary. Not because you don't want it, but because it never lasts. You're always being chased back to consciousness by something. A half-proved batch. The memory of a missed order. A cough you can't shake. You haven't slept through the night in years. You nap in fragments. You drift off with your boots still on. You dream about burning the bread, and sometimes you wake up convinced it's real, running down the stairs in a panic just to find the oven cold and silent. There's been talk in the scientific papers lately about the dangers of sleep deprivation, about what it does to the brain. Memory loss, mood swings, weakened immunity. Some even whisper it causes hallucinations. You believe it. Last week you could have sworn you saw your old master baker standing in the doorway, arms crossed, scowling. He's been dead 12 years. Probably. There's a growing concern among doctors about tradesmen's fatigue, an unofficial diagnosis they use when they don't know what else to call the slow rot of a working body. You suppose that's what this is? A slow rot. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual hollowing out. 1 hour less sleep at a time. You brew tea that tastes like boiled straw. You bite into a leftover roll, dry, chewy, but sustenance, and get to work. Your fingers don't move the way they used to. Kneading takes longer now. You can't feel the dough quite as well through the pads of your fingers. It's like someone's wrapped your nerves in cotton. Still, you push on, working by rhythm more than touch. There's comfort in the repetition. You know exactly how many strokes each dough needs. You know the smell of a good rise, the sound of a loaf as it settles. You don't need to be fully awake to do it anymore. You've become a sleepwalker with a baker's instinct. But it doesn't change the truth. You're running on fumes. There's nothing left in the tank but muscle memory and willpower, and even that is starting to fray. You glance at the apprentice as he walks in, bleary-eyed, chewing something that is almost definitely raw dough. He grins at you. You don't grin back. "Did you sleep?" he asks. You shrug. "I laid down." "That's about it." He snorts. "That's not the same." "No," you say, "but it's close enough." And you suppose that's the motto now. Close enough. You're not rested, but you're awake. Not healthy, but functioning. Not young, but not dead. Close enough. You sometimes wonder what would happen if you just didn't get up one morning, if you ignored the bell, if you stayed in bed and let the dough rise on its own and let the oven go cold. Would anyone come? Would the city notice? Or would they just mutter, "Lazy old baker," and buy rolls somewhere else? The fear isn't that you'll be missed, it's that you won't, so you keep going. Because this is the rhythm. This is the shape of your life, a loop of exhaustion and motion, of loaves and loss and longing for a good night's sleep that never comes. You look at the dough rising under the cloth. It's perfect. You're not. But that's fine. You don't need sleep to bake. You just need time, and you've got all night. Section 24. It's a strange thing watching your life hinge on something as delicate as wheat. Not gold, not land, not ambition, but wheat. Tiny grains ground into powder, sold by weight, and subject to forces far beyond your control. Weather, politics, tariffs, blight, any of them can twist your fate like a crusty pretzel. You're not a farmer, but your survival depends on the whims of the harvest just the same. And this year, the wheat's gone sideways. You heard it first from the flour merchant, a man whose face is always slightly powdered from the sacks he drags around, and whose entire personality is built around sighing. "Rough season," he said, shaking his head. "French imports up, yields down, prices rising." Again. Then he held up a sample of the new flour, coarser, darker, somehow heavier in the sack, and said with zero enthusiasm, "This'll have to do." You already knew it would be bad. The loaves from the last batch felt heavier, denser. You had to adjust your water ratio just to keep the dough from turning to mud. But you didn't expect the price jump. That's what really guts you. You run the numbers on a scrap of parchment, smudging them with your flour-dusted fingers. With these prices, you're either raising your rates or cutting corners. Neither is good. You remember the last time flour spiked. You were younger then, scrappier, still optimistic enough to think a smart workaround could fix everything. You stretched your dough with potato, added rye, barley, even a bit of oatmeal. The loaves came out all right, though some customers turned their noses up like you'd fed them pig slop. A few accused you of contaminating the bread. You shrugged it off. Bread is bread. But your profits dropped, and your rent didn't. Neither did your coal bill. This time, it's worse. You can feel it. Something shifted. There's a tension in the air, not just among bakers, but among customers too. They walk in with tighter grips on their coin purses. They ask more questions. They buy fewer loaves. Even your regulars are starting to cut back, skipping their second roll, asking if yesterday's bread is still edible. Some days you barely break even. 1 week like this is manageable. A month, that's a shuttered door. You've started trimming everything. Coal, for starters. You let the oven burn a little lower and bake a bit longer. Takes more time but saves a few pence. You reuse proving cloths longer than you should. You dilute the cleaning vinegar. You save every last crumb, turn stale crusts into rusk and sell it at a discount. The scraps get thrown to the alley cats or used to thicken stew. Your stew, mind you. You can't afford waste anymore. Waste is the enemy. Still, the math keeps hissing back at you from the corner of your ledger. If wheat prices keep climbing, you'll have no choice. You'll either have to close for good or do what so many others are quietly doing. Adulterate the bread. You hate the word. Adulterate. It sounds filthy. And it is in a way. Chalk, alum, ground bones, even plaster dust. Bakers have been adding them for centuries to bulk up loaves when the flour runs short. You swore you'd never do it. Even when your master did. Even when your neighbours did. Even when customers couldn't tell the difference and, in some cases, actually preferred the chalky whiteness of it all. But now you're staring at your dwindling flour sack and wondering if maybe, just maybe, a pinch of alum wouldn't hurt. You haven't done it. Not yet. But the thought has crept in, slithered into your mind like a rat looking for crumbs, and the worst part, you know where to get it. Everyone does. There's a man down near the docks who sells improvers. No questions asked. No conscience required. There's been some crackdowns, of course. inspectors stomping through bakeries, lifting loaves like they're archaeologists at a dig site. But it's all theatre. They don't catch the real cheats. They catch the clumsy ones, the sloppy ones, the poor sods who don't bribe the right people. You could get away with it, easily, but you don't. Because there's still that sliver of pride in you, that thin crust of morality that refuses to flake off, even under pressure. Your bread isn't fancy, but it's real. And when someone bites into it, they're getting exactly what they paid for: flour, water, salt, effort. Nothing more, nothing less. There's debate, of course, even among bakers. Some say a little alum never hurt anyone. Others swear by it. It makes the bread look brighter, last longer. It tricks the eye, pleases the gentry. But the scientists are whispering now louder than before. The alum might not be harmless. It might rot your gut, might cause bleeding, weakness, death. Who knows? The papers contradict themselves weekly. All you know is this: if you poison someone, even unintentionally, there's no coming back from that. Not for your shop, not for your name. So you tighten your belt, literally. Smaller meals, watered down stew, more bread scraps for dinner. You start selling smaller loaves for the same price, pray no one notices. You write polite notes to the merchant asking for credit. You patch your coat again. You stop replacing broken tools and start finding ways to work around them. And through it all, you keep baking. You knead with aching fingers. You fire the oven. You turn wheat, or what's left of it, into something vaguely nourishing. You sell to people who don't realise how close your shop is to collapse. You smile when they compliment the crust, even as your stomach growls in protest. You hear rumours, of course. Another bakery down the street has closed. One across the river got raided. A baker you used to know is now sweeping chimneys to make ends meet. It's a grim picture, and you're still hanging on. But the gap between hanging on and falling apart is narrowing fast. When you finally close up that night, you sit in the dark for a while, holding a crust in your hand and wondering how many more weeks you can stretch this out. You think about the old motto etched into the wooden sign above your shop door: "Give us this day our daily bread." Some days that feels like a promise. Other days it feels like a threat. Section 25. You don't hear the crash right away. You're elbow deep in a sticky, sulking lump of dough, muttering threats at it under your breath, when the sound finally punches through the fog in your head. A splintering crack from the back room loud enough to send a flock of pigeons fleeing from the chimney outside. You freeze, not because you're startled, but because you already know. You've been waiting for something like this, something to finally snap. You wipe your hands on the nearest rag and walk slowly toward the noise, not rushing. You already know what you'll find. And there it is. One of the wooden ceiling beams, the one above the cooling rack, has split clean through. A chunk of plaster lies on the floor like an accusation, surrounded by fine, powdery debris. A hairline crack runs across the ceiling, stretching wider by the second, like the building itself has finally decided it's had enough. You crouch, poke at the debris. The wood's soft, rotted through from years of trapped steam, coal smoke, and exactly 0 repairs. You press your hand to the wall and feel the faint tremor of instability, like the bakehouse is exhaling unevenly. The place is coming apart, literally. And really, why wouldn't it be? You've patched every leak with rags, braced every wobble with hope. You've been holding this place together with fingernails and twine. But buildings age like people. First a crack, then a slump, then a collapse. You sigh and sit on a flour sack, not trusting the stool anymore. A lifetime of work, and it's held together by force of habit. You've worn grooves into every surface. There are footprints in the floor where your boots land every day. The bench is bowed from your weight. The oven's bricks are blackened, cracked, yet still miraculously functioning. It's all alive. Or it was. Now it's unravelling. And so are you. You're not a fool. You've known for a while that you can't keep this up forever, but there's a difference between knowing and accepting. And today, the ceiling doesn't care if you're ready. It's made your choice for you. You spend the next hour doing triage, moving cooling racks away from the danger zone, shifting flour sacks from under the cracked beam, wiping the layer of dust that coats every surface now. You tell yourself you're buying time, that a repair might be possible, that the landlord might care, but you already know the ending. This place is done. You sit back again and look around, trying to take it all in. There's the scorch mark where the oven once flared too high and nearly burned your face off. There's the corner where the apprentice slipped in spilled water and knocked over 2 trays of rising dough. There's the window where that urchin used to peek in every morning. waiting for you to turn your back so he could steal a roll. You never chased him. He needed it more than you did. Everything here holds a memory, a scar, a lesson. It's not just a bakery, it's the archive of your entire life. And now it's closing. You try to picture your life without it. No early mornings, no soot-stained shirts, no aching wrists. What would that even feel like? Would you sleep? Would your body start healing? Would you become someone else entirely? There's a theory, unproven of course, that the body, when removed from chronic stress, begins to regenerate. Muscles uncoil, skin softens, lungs breathe fully again. You don't know if you believe it. You don't know if you even want that kind of healing. Who are you if you're not this? Not a baker, not the man behind the oven, not the hands that feed the neighbourhood. You stand, walk to the oven. It's still warm, still loyal in its way. You place your palm against the bricks one last time and close your eyes. The heat hums under your skin, a low steady thrum that feels like both heartbeat and eulogy. You imagine all the loaves you've made, thousands of them, tens of thousands. None of them remain. They've all been eaten, forgotten, digested into stories that never included your name. And that's the truth of it, isn't it? Bakers don't get remembered. We just keep everyone else alive long enough to write the history books. Still, you have no regrets. You did something real here. You fed people. In the middle of one of the dirtiest, cruelest, most indifferent centuries this city has ever endured, you gave people something warm to hold. And that matters. Even if they never said thank you. Even if they never knew your name. You lock up for the last time. The bolt slides into place with a finality that makes your stomach twist. You look at the door and know, without question, you'll never walk through it again as a baker. The apprentice will go elsewhere. The customers will find other shops. The building will crumble, be gutted, replaced. And this whole chapter, your chapter, will fade into the background noise of history. You light a candle. Not because you need it, but because it feels right. You place it on the windowsill just above the worn-out display tray. The flickering flame casts long, uneven shadows across the racks and benches. You sit in your chair by the oven and watch it burn down. No words, no ceremony, just quiet. Eventually you take off your apron, fold it slowly, place it on the bench. That simple act feels enormous, like taking off a uniform, like laying down a burden. Outside, the city stirs. Horses clip along cobbles. Someone shouts in the distance. The world keeps going, and for the first time in decades, you're not part of its machinery. You step outside, the cool air hitting your face like a question. What now? You don't know, but at least you don't have to wake up at midnight anymore. You close the door on the bakehouse and keep walking, not looking back. The street smells like rain and coal smoke, but tonight it also smells faintly of freedom. You've never felt this light. Your hands dangle at your sides like they don't know what to do without dough clinging to them. The city hums softly, gas lamps casting golden halos in the fog, and for once you're not on a deadline, not racing a timer, not counting coins in your head. You're just walking. You pass a child with a crust of bread in her hands. She doesn't notice you. Why would she? To her, bread is a thing that simply appears, warm and ready. You smile anyway. You hope it's one of yours, from some batch long past. You hope it's feeding her the way this work has always, quietly, invisibly, fed the city. When you reach the edge of the Thames, you stop and lean on the railing. The water glints darkly below, moving slow and heavy. Barges creak by, their lanterns bobbing. A breeze comes off the river, cool against your scorched skin. It smells like iron and silt, but it tastes like air, real air. You inhale deeply, and for the first time in years your lungs feel like they're actually filling. You think about the oven cooling behind you, the cracked ceiling, the thousands of loaves that rose and vanished, and you realise that even though there won't be a plaque or a statue, you've left something behind. Warmth in people's bellies, small kindnesses in hard times, a trail of crusts that told a story no book ever wrote. You close your eyes, the city hums, your pulse slows, and just like that, for the first time in decades you let yourself drift, not into a nap, but into real, deep, unbroken sleep.